One more minute. We're off to the races, guys. Hey, Denise. And here's Lisa Chaddock.
Good morning.
Awesome.
So I don't know if it was Bobby that I was communicating with last weekend, but I was in San Marcos and we went to Wonder World and we went down under the Balcones Fault and everything. So it brought to life all the archaeological things that we learned, a couple weeks before. So
isn't that awesome?
It was.
When you get to see it.
Yes.
Up close and personal.
And thankful that it wasn't active.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That gives me another place to put on my list of things I want to go see out that way. Okay, it's 8:30. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. We are lucky enough to have Connor join us today. He was called away to a forest fire in the Guadalupe Mountains, but he has made time to join us this morning so he can tell us about the Texas Forest Service. You want to go ahead and unmute Connor, and do you need me to share my screen and get your PowerPoint up?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind doing the Jones State Forest one.
Okay, let me see where I find my share screen and Jones State Forest and slideshow. I know. There you go. You just tell me next whenever you want me to scroll.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Good morning, Heartwood interns. My name is Connor Murnane. I am the district forester with the Texas A&M Forest Service in our Conroe district. If you guys happen to hear about, or maybe you knew John Warner, he recently retired at the end of January. And I've taken over his position as district forester in Conroe. So this presentation, this first one we're doing this morning, we're going to talk about the William Goodrich Jones State Forest located in Conroe. This is where Heartwood has their office at, where you would typically do your intern trainings at if we weren't in such a strange year, strange time. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind going on the next slide here, Caroline, we'll go ahead and get started with this.
There we go.
So we're going to go into a little history about the Texas A&M Forest Service, how it was founded, who we are, what we do, and then go a little bit into the Jones State Forest itself. So the Texas A&M Forest Service was founded by the legislature in 1915 with the original name of the Forestry Department of Texas A&M University System. So if we imagine East Texas at the peak of the timber harvesting time, late 1800s, early 1900s, most of East Texas is getting harvested. A lot of that original timber that's been growing for some time is being harvested and used to build railroads, new logging towns, and new cities developing all across the state. But there was no real plan for regeneration or reforestation of East Texas. And so legislature, recognizing this, established the Texas A&M Forest Service to help address this. In 1926, the agency was renamed to the Texas Forest Service, and following the catastrophic wildfire season in 2011, the name was changed again to the Texas A&M Forest Service. And TFS was mandated to do three things here in the state. First and primary being to direct all forest interests and matters pertaining to forestry within the jurisdiction of the state. So we help. One of my main job responsibilities is to assist private landowners with managing their own forested lands, maintaining their timber, and helping them get that timber sold, and then providing recommendations and guidance on how best to reforest their properties. We also serve as lead agency in dealing with wildfires across the state. So that happens to be what I'm doing today. I'm out in the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, dealing with a wildfire out here, assisting the national park with that. And we also assist with all hazard emergency response. So we play a big role in all sorts of different things when it comes to hurricane season or during the most recent winter weather storm. We had motor graders out, scraping ice off the roads, personnel out passing out bottled water and blankets and things to those in need. So we do a lot of different things. We sometimes get involved in some goofy stuff, but they figure we're good at managing and handling wildfires, so they kind of plug us into all sorts of different incidents and emergency responses. You can go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Carolyn. So here's a couple pictures from back in the day of TFS being originally founded. Top left is how timber was hauled to the timber mills or to the closest railroad track there using mules and carts and things. Top right is the first state forester of Texas, J.H. Foster. He's there in College Station going on a little parade advertising the newly established Texas Forestry Department at Texas A&M University. Bottom left is one of our early era wildfire suppression vehicles. It's just an old Jeep there with a plow mounted on the back. It looks a lot different than what we use today. And then bottom right, wildfire prevention, wildfire education is a very big role of what we do with the agency. And so that's kind of one of our old school advertising pictures there of how we used to advertise wildfire prevention. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So going into how Texas A&M is involved with all of this stuff, Texas was first in the nation to establish the state forestry agency as a part of a land grant university system. And since then, 4 different states have done the same, those being Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. So typically with other states, maybe if you go up to the Northeast or out west somewhere, you'll typically find the state's forestry department within the Department of Agriculture or within their Department of Natural Resources. So being within a university system is somewhat unique, but it does have its certain benefits. We somewhat get sheltered from a lot of bureaucratic red tape and things like that. So, and we have a unique retirement system with the Teachers Retirement Service, which is greatly beneficial. So TFS is one of 8 state agencies within the university system.
Hey, Connor, your voice is breaking up really badly, Connor. Hey, Connor? Connor, your voice is breaking. Your voice now sounds like the teacher on Charlie Brown.
That's a good one.
Isn't that kind of what that sounds like?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Oh no. Do you want to call back in? I'll leave it right here and we'll see if we get a better sound.
I'll give him a second to do that, then I'll take over if need be.
Okay.
He probably doesn't have a real good connection if he's way out there.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. He's way
Yeah.
out in the boonies over there.
Right.
Let's see if he wants to pop back in.
Well, I'll talk a little bit till he comes back. I don't know what he was trying to say on the other end, but yeah, the other states. And I was going to say, I had to Google it. Yes, Nebraska does have a forest service.
Oh, dear.
But it's not like in Texas. We have the national forest and grasslands, and Nebraska has the same thing. They have national forests there as well and national grasslands, and that's what you think of as Nebraska. And so obviously they also do have a state agency there as well. We've always been a part of the A&M system, even from the beginning. So we are a state agency, but we're also a part of the A&M system. And we report directly to the Vice Chancellor of Agriculture. A few years ago, they kind of switched things around. We've always reported to Vice Chancellor at A&M, but now we're actually under the AgriLife umbrella. So, but still, not other than that, not much has changed with that. So go to the next one. And this shows there's 8 members of the Texas A&M University system that are state agencies as well, and we're one of them, and so is Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, the Engineering Experiment Station, the the Engineering Extension Service and AgriLife Research, Transportation Institute, and Texas Department of Emergency Management. Back like Connor said a few years ago when they changed the name to Texas Forest Service, and for 98 years we were Texas Forest Service, and then in 2011 or 12 or 13, I think he said 11, A&M decided to brand all of their entities with the A&M name. So that's why it's now Texas A&M AgriLife, Texas A&M Forest Service, and all of the universities except Tarleton State. Somehow Tarleton missed that, which is cool to me because I went to Tarleton for 2 years, but have the Texas A&M name in front of them. But they're all state agencies, but we are also part of the A&M system. Okay, the next. We have 5 state forests now and 2 arboretums that we manage. Connor, of course, since he's down in Conroe, he manages the W.G. Jones State Forest, and you'll hear more about that here in a little bit. We have the I.D. Fairchild State Forest in Cherokee County between Rusk and Palestine, the E.O. Seekey State Forest, which is in Newton County near Kirbyville, Kirby State Forest in Tyler near Woodville, and Masterson State Forest in Jasperson. This is a very tiny state forest. So is Kirby, pretty tiny. Masterson State Forest in Jasper County near Buna. And each one of those is managed by a different district forester. So the one who is in the Kirbyville / Jasper district, he manages the Seekey State Forest, and the one who's in the Jacksonville office manages the Fairchild, and so on. So a local district forester may or may not have a state forest associated with them. So only 5 of our foresters will have, actually 4, because Masterson is managed by the same one who does Seekey. Next. And we'll talk a little bit more about the W.G. Jones State Forest. Next. That's the one in Conroe between one in Conroe near the Woodlands. Next.
Donna, I think Connor's back on. Connor,
okay, go ahead.
Connor, can you let us hear your voice? Let's see if you're okay now. Oh no, Connor. It is so not good. You still sound kind of like the teacher on Charlie Brown. Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and let Donna finish the presentation for you. I'm so sorry, but you stay safe out there fighting those forest fires.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes,
that's good.
now we get you. That's better. Talk some more, Connor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Better?
Yes.
Okay.
This is much better. Okay, good. Whew, I don't know what was going on, but it was crazy sounding. Okay, you ready to take over, Connor?
Yes, thank you, Donna. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I got through the state forests, and now you're
Okay.
starting on the Jones.
Perfect.
Okay, so we'll go into the Jones here. Like Donna said, there are 5 state forests that TFS manages. They're a lot different than state parks. So they're not managed by Parks and Wildlife. They are managed by the Texas Forest Service. So we'll go ahead and get involved with the Jones and talk about the Jones.
Awesome.
Next slide, Carolyn.
There we go.
So in 1926, the Texas A&M Forestry Department acquired 1,616 acres in Montgomery County with funds appropriated by legislature. I actually have, I found a copy of the deed, and I think legislature paid around $9,000 for all this acreage in Montgomery County back then. So if you can imagine what that would translate to today's values, I don't think it could compare. And back in the day, we were very original with naming our state forest. So Jones State Forest was originally called State Forest Number 2, Seekey State Forest over in Newton County being State Forest Number 1. And the original purpose, which remains to this day, is that the Jones State Forest should be used for research, demonstration, and education, and serving as an example of working forest Texas landowners in East Texas and across the state. Next slide. Interesting part of history about the Jones State Forest, the second pine seedling nursery in Texas was established here in 1927 with a very impressive capacity of producing 1 million bare root seedlings per year. After this was done for several years, This use was discontinued following the establishment of a facility in Alto, Texas, which is no longer in operation. In 1949, the state forest was officially dedicated and renamed the William Goodrich Jones State Forest in honor of the father of forestry in Texas, Mr. William Goodrich Jones. And as I was talking about earlier in the presentation, Mr. Jones is really the key driver behind bringing sound forestry management principles and conservation practices to the state of Texas. He was the founding and first president of the Texas Forestry Association, and he promoted a lot of those goods from sustainable yield forestry and reforestation practices. Next slide. So today, the Jones State Forest sits at 1,722 acres. We are located 1 mile west of I-45 on both sides of FM 1488. So you'll see about 400 acres there on the north side of 1488, and the remaining 1,300 on the south side of 1488. All state forests are open from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. There are no entrance fees. We have 2 lakes that are open to catch and release fishing with a fishing license. There are 3 different parking areas located along the forest, and we have approximately 17 plus miles of trails. Unique part of the forest that there are very minimal amenities on the forest. So with that being said, that there are no restrooms and there are no trash cans located on the forest, we kindly ask a pack it in, pack it out philosophy when using the forest. Next slide, 4. So the Jones State Forest sees approximately 100,000 plus visitors annually. And we have a lot of different visitors that use the forest, a lot of different interests and hobbies that people do, from birding. Donna's going to go into a lot more of that part of the Jones State Forest. We also have a very avid horseback riding community. They get their own special parking area, and they really value and appreciate the opportunity to ride in such an urban county like Montgomery County. Also a large geocaching community, and numerous different other service learning projects and special interest education projects, all sorts of different things like that happening on the Jones, and as well as commercial forestry operations. So like we said, it is a working forest used as demonstration and research. So you will see commercial forestry operations happening across the Jones State Forest. Next slide. This is just an aerial view of what the forest looked like. This is kind of a good way to show you how urbanized all of our boundaries across the forest have become. So the left side of the left picture there is aerial imagery from 1996, and the right side is aerial imagery from 2017. You can just see how much development has occurred along the boundaries of the Jones in just this short amount of time. Essentially, all boundaries of the forest are surrounded by some sort of residential community, apartment complex, schools, things like that. So lots of different neighbors, lots of different stakeholders that have an interest in the Jones. Next slide. Prescribed burning. If you guys have maybe been driving around the Jones State Forest, or if you follow us on Facebook or anything like that, you may see typically from that November to March's timeframe, we do complete some prescribed burning objectives on the forest. And with that being said, East Texas is the piney woods of East Texas is a fire-dependent ecosystem, and fire has historically been part of the landscape. Native Americans embrace the practice and recognize the importance of using fire on the landscape to improve browse and habitat for wildlife species. In a forestry standpoint, it also controls low-quality hardwoods and shrubs that would compete with our desired crop species of pine trees. So a lot of those undesirable hardwoods being like sweet gum, and the main control objective we have on the Jones would be trying to control all the yaupon that you see on the forest floor. And prescribed burning of all the forestry management practices that we do on the Jones, prescribed burning is by far the cheapest and most cost-effective of all those practices. So very beneficial to the habitat for wildlife and things like that. Red cockaded woodpecker, I'm not going to go into much detail about this because we're about to get a whole presentation from Donna on this, but the red cockaded woodpecker is present on the Jones, protected under the 1970 Endangered Species Act, creates habitat in living old growth pine trees, and the Jones is host to one of the most urban population of the species. Next slide. Some cool pictures. I'm not gonna steal Donna's thunder on this, so we'll just get into more detail on this much later. Next slide. Texas Senate Bill 345. If you guys maybe had heard, around 2017-ish, there was a big push to develop a part of the Jones. This was a push from the A&M University system to build somewhat of a satellite campus on the Jones somewhere. And there was a lot of backlash from the local community about this. And essentially the original bill that was authored to develop the Jones made a complete 180 and was turned into Texas Senate Bill 345. Brief summary of this Senate bill, which took effect on September 1st, 2019, is that the entire territory of the Jones State Forest must remain natural, scenic, undeveloped, and open in a manner that maintains the tree canopy cover of the forest. So that's great legislation to have in place to help protect the Jones in perpetuity. There is an exception for TxDOT, of course, to if they ever need to widen the 1488. There is an exception for them. But other than that, it's great to see this. It's great to have this in place to help protect the Jones from any future development. Next slide. Volunteer and sponsorship opportunities. If you guys are ever involved in doing more on the Jones, getting involved with us, there you guys are top front and center there at the Texas Master Naturalist Heartwood chapter. Of course, we have a great avid group of Heartwood members that come out every Tuesday morning and help with our flower beds and things. I think we're looking at starting up some trash pickup days on the Jones, and we're also looking at helping improve and maintain our tree nursery there on the Jones as well. So just reach out to Brenda Reeves on that one. Definitely, she stays in touch with all of us and coordinates with me on getting a lot of those projects done on that. Lots of Boy Scout and Girl Scout projects, Eagle Scout projects. I get 3 to 4 of those every month. Doing a lot of trail work or trail maintenance, trail rehab, adding benches and tables and bleachers and outdoor education stations, and the hopes that we get to go back to some normalcy and have field trips again on the forest. If you're ever interested in doing something like this or something more in depth, we'd be happy to talk with you. There's our office phone number. Next slide. Are there any questions about that? Be happy to take some questions on that.
We had one question from one of our participants who was wondering why there aren't garbage cans on the forest, because he sees a lot of trash out there sometimes.
Yeah, so back in the day, we used to have trash cans in the forest, and it turned into such a hassle. It was, empty the trash cans maybe once a week to twice a week to every single day with a trailer and a truck and 2 trucks. And so people dumping a lot of their own household garbage and things like that turned into a very big hassle. I'm still debating on the fact of maybe putting some more out, maybe just for the fact of so people have a place to throw away their dog waste and things like that, because that tends to pile up along the parking lots. But
and they'd have to be wildlife proof too, because raccoons
yes,
will be
and raccoons will get all inside of it too. So,
and
yeah,
they throw
point.
stuff everywhere. They don't put their garbage back when they're done. So we are, as Connor mentioned earlier, we are thinking of one of the projects at Jones Forest of having a crew that would go out and walk the trails and pick up things that are out there that don't belong out there. And so, as he mentioned, Brenda Reeves, who is our volunteer service projects coordinator, is going to be getting crews together to do that, to walk together. And it's a great way to spend a morning. And if you'd like more information, you can contact her at heartwoodvsp@gmail.com. Connor, you ready for the next presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me get that started. Go ahead and stop this one and go back down here. Oop. Screen. Okay. And it's this one. And slideshow. Okay, let me share screen again. Whoop, wrong one. This one. Okay. There we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yes. Thank
Awesome.
you. Thank you.
You are very
Okay. So our topic today is forest ecology. I'm going to go over a little bit of this, and then I think Donna's going to give us some great information and details on red cockaded woodpecker and the forest environment that species lives in. So we'll go ahead and get started here with forest ecology. Go over a few definitions and facts and things like that. So next slide, please. So what is forest ecology? And we have this great definition here. I really love this. This is the study of the forest as a biological community with the interrelationships between the various trees and other organisms constituting the community, and with the interrelationships between these organisms and the physical environment in which they exist. So it's a lot more than just trees that grows in a forest community. There's also the understory of the forest floor, grasses, herbs, forbs, things like that that are growing on the forest floor. And I always like to say, that we as humans have a very vital play and role in forest ecology and forest environments. We are very much involved with the management of these ecosystems, and they play a very big role in maintaining them and what their future looks like. Next slide, please. So what is forestry? Forestry, as defined by the Society of American Foresters, is the science, art, and practice of creating, managing, and using and conserving forests in a sustainable manner to meet the desired goals, needs, and values of whatever that objective for that landowner or that agency, whoever manages that part of the forest. These are the objectives. These are the management practices. These are the things that are the driving force behind why we are managing these woods and these trees and forests. Next slide. We already went over a little bit about what TFS does. Again, we just provide leadership to ensure that the state's trees, forests, and related natural resources are protected and sustained for the benefit of all. We were born in East Texas, of course. We have since expanded across the state. You'll find TFS offices all the way from the Beaumont to Jasper, Kirbyville area, all the way out to Alpine, Texas, mountains and Amarillo. So we are across the state helping to manage those natural resources. Next slide, please. So let's go over, briefly go over what the forest in Texas looks like and how much they take up. There's approximately 62 million acres of forests and woodlands within the state of Texas, and this is the size of Louisiana and Mississippi combined. Of those 62 million acres in the state, 12 million acres is located in the piney woods of East Texas, and this equates to being the second largest in total forest land in the United States, behind Alaska, of course. And forests in Texas account for 23% of all the woodlands located in the southern United States. So this area is defined from, the East Texas piney woods all the way along the southeastern coast, all the way up to Virginia. So Texas accounts for a very large portion of those woodlands in the south. Next slide, please. Who owns the forest in East Texas? So there's 12 million acres of forest located within East Texas. And 92% of those forests is either held by private landowners or industry and investment landowners like TIMOs, timber investment management organizations, or real estate investment trusts. So that leaves 8% of the forests in East Texas managed by some sort of public agency or local city parks, state forests, national forests, things of that nature. So a very small percentage of the forest in East Texas is public land. So a large percentage of it, 92% is managed by those private landowners and industry, which is why it's such an important mission for TFS to help connect those private landowners with the proper resources, proper management practices, and recommendations so that they can properly take care of their trees and their forests. Next slide, please. How have the East Texas forests changed over this century? Since 1935, East Texas has gained almost 2 million acres of forest. So a lot of this is converting from pasture land to timberland. Since 1992, Northeast Texas has gained 270,000 acres of forest. Again, this is going to be from people going from pasture land and converting that to timberland. And also since 1992, Southeast Texas has lost 159,000 acres of forest. This is largely due to urban development and urbanization within the Houston area, of course, here within the Conroe area, Beaumont area, things like that. So as more and more urbanization occurs, we tend to lose those forest lands. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the 2019 economic impact located in Montgomery County. This is the Texas forest sector economic impact. What role does the forest sector have within Montgomery County economically? And in 2019 had a total economic impact of $72.8 million in total industry output. This supported 524 jobs with a payroll of 18.9 million located within the county. Of the 43 East Texas counties in Texas, Montgomery County happened to rank 21st in terms of output value. And this has changed a lot. In the early days of the timber boom, Montgomery County was the #1 producer and #1 exporter of timber products within the state, and probably within a large majority of the Southeast. So it has dramatically changed over the century. And the wood-based sector here in Montgomery County ranks 9th among manufacturing sectors employers. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go over some of the ecoregions of Texas, the major forest regions of the state, and what species and all that. So next slide. So the major forest regions across the state, of course, we're all well familiar with the piney woods there. We recognize 43 counties within East Texas as being within the piney woods. Montgomery, Waller counties being located on the western edge of the piney woods there. As we move west towards, the College Station, Bryant area, we tend to get into the Post Oak Savannah and into the Blackland Prairies area. As you move further west, you get into Live Oak Juniper, cross timbers, and mountain forest, actually, where I'm coming from today in the Guadalupe National Park. If you haven't been out to the mountain forest regions of West Texas, I highly recommend it. You can find a small population of ponderosa pine in the Fort Davis area, which is tends to grow in the Rocky Mountains, but there's a small subset of it here in the western part of the state. Very, very beautiful part of the state. Next slide, please. So as we look at the piney woods, the forest region of Texas that we're most familiar with, these upland areas of the piney woods tend to include a multitude of different tree species, the majority of that being pine trees. And there's 4 major, we call them the southern yellow pine species. The 4 major species being longleaf pine tends to grow in the far eastern portions of East Texas. Shortleaf pine, loblolly pine. Loblolly pine is by far the most the most valuable commercially and the most popular of the 4, and then slash pine. You'll also find multitude different oak species, from post to southern red to water oak to blackjacks, and you'll also find different other hardwood species like black hickory, sweet gum, sassafras, and elm tree. The major shrub species in the East Texas upland forest is going to be in the southeast part of the state, going to be yaupon. We're all well familiar with that if you're from the Woodlands area. That tends to grow everywhere in the woodlands. Wax myrtle, and then a multitude of different vine species, greenbrier, Virginia creeper, and crossvines. Next slide, please. East Texas bottomland forest. If you've ever been to like the Caddo Lake area, this is like the picturesque bottomland forest of East Texas. There's going to be a lot of different oak species growing here. You'll also find those very unique bald cypress, water tupelo, river birch, a lot of those different species that like their feet wet. Shrub species in these wildlife forests is going to be swamp privet, buttonbush, and wax myrtle. Next slide. I wonder if that'll work. We don't have audio. Hey, Carolyn, I don't think we have audio for that.
Was there no audio, Connor?
There should be. There should be audio on that one.
Well,
We're not hearing it.
Oh, okay, because I could hear it, so I thought it was plain okay.
Oh, sorry. No, we're not hearing it.
Oh, rats. Okay, let's see if there's a. Oh,
Carolyn, you have to go to where you shared your screen.
yeah.
There's a little dot, and you have to share the sound,
Oh,
share
yeah.
computer sound.
Let's see. I can. Oh, do I want to do? Let's see.
Should be like second or third option from the bottom when you pull up the.
Okay, let me do this and then go back here. And see, it just jumps right to the. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Share sound. Yay. Okay, ready? Let me know if you.
Got it.
Awesome.
When you walk into a ponderosa pine forest at the Davis Mountains, it has a different feeling from everything else around it. You just feel that the place you're in is special, and we want to make sure that future generations have a chance to experience that same feeling and see that special part of the Davis Mountains. The ponderosa pines have really suffered from the recent droughts, and we've been losing a lot of the trees out there, and that's where working with the Texas Forest Service has been really helpful in helping us understand and manage the ponderosa pine ecosystem.
Frankly, it broke my heart to see, what was going on out there. It was just hundreds, if not thousands of acres of dead ponderosa pine. So I knew after that first visit, we had to do something. In Texas, it's found in two very small populations. One is in the higher elevations of the Guadalupe National Park, and the other is here in the Davis Mountains, the island in the sky. It's under siege. It's being threatened. It's weather changes in the weather patterns that we've seen over the last 20 or so years, coupled with wildfires and bark beetle attacks, have really placed the species in Texas in peril.
Well, what we're doing to try to counteract the effects of fire bleeds over into several different other problems that we're treating at the same time that we're trying to get a handle on. And the main thing is to reduce down the density of the forest that is competing with the ponderosa pine.
Well, I think a big role of our agency is providing technical assistance, being able to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. And this was not any different. We were thrilled when the Conservancy came to us and said, will you help us with this project?
Texas Forest Service has been a really great organization to work with because we share a lot of the same goals. The Nature Conservancy wants to protect the entire ecosystem out at the Davis Mountains, and the Texas Forest Service has really been helping us focus on the ponderosa pine woodlands.
We couldn't have done this without each other. Texas is big, and this project was not an exception. People with common objectives can come together in a collaborative way to make sure things get done, again, the way they need to get done.
This is something that, you know, we can all work toward and develop a better way of managing these stands in the future.
It's important really because it's part of our heritage as Texans.
If we lose the ponderosa pines out of the Davis Mountains, the place will be different. It won't be the Davis Mountains that we know and love right now.
It's taken a very bad situation and finding the tools, what we need to make sure that this stand of very important pine trees extend into the future.
This is sort of the last stand. We've got to try to do some things to protect and conserve the species for the future, or it's literally going to go away. It's going away before our eyes right now.
Thanks, Carolyn. So this is going over our Operation Ponderosa project located in the Davis Mountains out at the
Your voice is breaking up again, Connor. Still not good.
Side for the opportunity to go out there early 2008. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Still got me?
Yes. Good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, so yeah, the Operation Ponderosa project that was going over the Nature Conservancy property outside of Fort Davis. It's a very awesome project. We harvest cones from the standing ponderosas out there and grow seeds at our Idalou nursery to help promote and plant more of the ponderosa pines throughout the Davis Mountains. So talking about forest ecology, we can't go without talking about succession, disturbances, and recoveries of this ecosystem.
Breaking up again, Connor. I don't know why it goes out like that.
All into. You got me?
Yep, you're back again.
Okay, I may just need to talk louder probably. Okay, next slide, please. So succession is a replacement of one plant community in an area with another of a different plant composition over time. And with that being said, succession is divided into two different categories. Primary succession is going to be where plant communities establish where there have been no plant communities before. Example of this would be glacial movements, volcanic islands, and sandbars, things like that. Primary succession takes hundreds, if not thousands of years to evolve over time. Now, that differs compared to secondary succession, where plant communities that establish following the disturbance of an existing community. Examples of secondary succession would be hurricanes, floods, wildfires as some sort of human interaction or human disturbance cause. And with that being said, we encounter secondary succession in our daily lives. There's some sort of secondary succession going on daily in some sort of forested ecosystem across the world. Next. slide, please. So just a quick little graphic of what that looks like, primary succession versus secondary succession. You tend to see some similarities and some differences here. Primary succession evolves from, from bare rock to these climax communities, and secondary succession, where those communities have already existed, some sort of disturbance occurs, and then the new plant communities are established, and then later evolve into those climax communities. Next slide, please. The stages of succession. So stage one in this secondary succession, we have some sort of disturbance. Again, this is going to be like hurricanes, tornadoes, ice storms. We've had one of those recently that we're all well familiar with. And of course, human interaction or human caused disturbances like urbanization, development, land fragmentation, all that sorts of stuff going on across the country, across the globe. Stage two going into succession is going to be the pioneer species. These are shade intolerant grasses, shrubs, and weeds. Pioneer species are poor competitors and they require full sunlight to thrive. The pioneer species in this pioneer stage also provide foraging habitat for birds, mice, reptiles, amphibians, things like that. As we move out of the pioneer species, pioneer stage of succession, we move into stage three, where trees start playing a part of the ecosystem, and these are shade intolerant and tree and shrub species that begin to dominate the canopy. These are things like pines, cedars, hackberries. They are very fast growing and short-lived species compared to succession as a whole when we look at it from a larger timeline. The important part about this stage of succession is that to provide foraging habitat for squirrels, possums, raccoons, all sorts of different species, birds, and things like that. And they will shade out the original pioneer species. Those species in stage two that are very shade intolerant, these tree species will outcompete them. Moving from stage three, we reach our climax stage of succession. This is when the development of the climax forest has been reached, and shade tolerant species such as oak and hickory that are maintained until the next sort of disturbance that occurs. These are very stable, self-maintaining and self-reproducing states of forest development. And then openings in the forest canopy allow for gap phase succession. These openings tend to play a role in timber harvests. You'll sometimes see timber harvests that promote these sort of gap phases to help with wildlife habitat and edge effect and promoting the next cohort of species to develop. So that's the 4 stages of succession, of secondary succession, where the disturbance occurs. And then we move all the way through from that disturbance to the climax. And then it turns again and starts over from stage 1 to stage 4. Next slide, please. So we can talk more about some disturbances here. Succession is driven by the maturation of plant communities, and these disturbances caused by external factors can greatly alter this process. Disturbances alter the progression of succession by moving the community to an earlier or later stage. So we had those 4 stages. These disturbances will move succession either earlier or later in the stages. And we've talked about a few of these disturbances here already. Again, tornadoes, hurricanes, insects, wildfires, ice, drought, strong winds, all sorts of different disturbances that can occur across these forested ecosystems. Is audio breaking up again?
Off and on it is. You're a little better right there at the end, but off and on it's kind of going to that tinny sound.
Are you there?
Say that again, Connor. We aren't hearing anything if you're talking, Connor.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there, that's good. That's a good one.
Okay.
Okay.
Stand still. Stay right
Okay,
there.
I'm gonna stand right here.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you all for your patience today.
Thank you, Connor.
Again, these disturbances, there's a multitude of different disturbances. You can even think of some more other than this. This is just an example of it. Sometimes, these disturbances do good things for it, and sometimes they can alter the landscape dramatically. Next slide, please. We'll have a few examples of some of those disturbances. So for this example here, let's forego the wildfire example. Let's talk about the prescribed burn example. This is a controlled burning occurring on the forest floor. Quick question for y'all: what effect do you think this disturbance will have on succession? If you want to maybe reply in the chat or something like that.
We have several answers. We have positive depending on the intensity, and someone said positive effect again, stage 4.
Yeah, exactly. So the main purpose of these prescribed burns, and sometimes when low intensity wildfires occur, that helps control low quality hardwood competition, like those sweet gum and oak species that we're not really looking for when we're managing for pine species. Really helps control and provide optimal control of those species, and especially yaupon, a lot of those brushy understory species that will outcompete those naturally regenerating pines on the forest floor. It's important that we allow sunlight reach the forest floor for growth of those new pines, as well as natural native species that grow on the forest floor as well. So this will probably move us to an earlier stage of succession as we maintain that. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another example. This is a southern pine beetle outbreak that occurred in the mid-1990s in East Texas. What effect do you think this disturbance will have on succession?
We have vote for negative, negative, not good.
I think that sums it up there perfectly. That southern pine beetle outbreak causes a widespread destruction. You can see here from this picture alone. This is a very iconic picture that our forest entomologist took, Dr. Ron Billings at the time. Very iconic picture of what a southern pine beetle outbreak looks like in East Texas. I mean, what you're looking at there is complete. I mean, all the trees there are gone, and you have to go several miles in advance and start harvesting timber to help slow the spread of a southern pine beetle outbreak. You can go in there and start a salvage timber harvest if you get in there in enough time, and do that as well. If any of you have had the opportunity to visit Colorado or somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, you've seen the Rocky Mountain pine beetle causing similar destruction throughout the Rocky Mountain range. So this disturbance will initially start everything back over again. After the salvage sale, salvage timber harvest, it will essentially start fresh and brand new over again. So, next slide, please. Recovery. So after this disturbance occurs, it's important to talk about recovery. These vegetative communities recover from disturbance through the natural process of succession. No matter what the disturbance is, it can be whatever a disturbance that occurs on the landscape, there is always a plant community equipped to establish itself on site. You'll see this after we do prescribed burning throughout the forest on the Jones State Forest. You'll see within 2.5 weeks, you'll start seeing grass start growing on the forest floor. So no matter what that disturbance may look like, there is always some sort of plant community ready to establish itself on the site. With that being said, proper forest management can also help speed up these recovery efforts. Those recovery efforts for regeneration of forest communities can look like natural regeneration, where you're relying on existing residual trees that are on site to produce the next crop of trees. If there are no trees left, then you'll have to rely on artificial regeneration, where you are growing and purchasing seedlings off-site, and then they are either hand planted or machine planted on site to help grow the next set of trees. There, you'll see a hand planter there on the bottom of that picture. If you've never had the opportunity to see hand tree planters work, they are some of the most impressive group of folks I have ever seen work in my life. They will cover acres in one day, just planting trees all day long. Some of the hardest working folks I've ever encountered. So next slide, please. Oh, good. So we have a quick break here. I may shorten that probably, what do you think, Carolyn, 10 minutes maybe? People need to take a break.
I'm thinking 10 minutes sounds good.
Okay, so I've got 9:25.
Good.
We'll look at 9:35.
Perfect. That sounds awesome. So a 10-minute break, guys. I expect you all back at 9:35. Grab a little cup of something and hit the bathroom, and we'll see you back.
Connor, unless you have to take a break, I have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. They say, I live in Huffman. Will a longleaf pine thrive in my area? I have several longleaf. I have it says they said several longleaf. Would like a longleaf. Maybe they meant loblolly, but
Yeah.
would it survive in? Okay, gotcha. That's what I thought. Okay, what about Huffman and longleaf?
So Huffman is a little outside the native range of longleaf. With that being said, I think longleaf would do fine in the Huffman area as well, as long as you're planting it in the right site. You don't want its root system to be too wet or anything like that. A nice dry sandy soil would do well for that. Again, it is outside, we are just a little west of the native range of longleaf, but it should grow fine. We have a pretty big one just outside of our office door that grows just fine.
Awesome.
Jamie mentioned our southern pine beetles native, and they are. We do have southern pine beetles here. Now, the last several years, Texas A&M Forest Service traps every year to see what the southern pine beetle population is like. So last several years, we have not trapped any southern pine beetles. So we're way past due for a bad year of beetle infestations. There are other bark beetles. As Connor mentioned, there's the mountain bark beetle. We also have other bark beetles here, the Ips and Graver beetles, the black turpentine beetle, but none are as destructive here in East Texas as the southern pine beetle. I put it in the chat, and I don't know if other people saw it, but that huge infestation of southern pine beetles that killed, if I'm remembering right, that's out at Indian Mounds Wilderness area, about 10,000 acres of the 12,000 acres of the wilderness area. That was in a designated wilderness area, part of the national forest. And in designated wilderness areas, you can't do regular forest management. You can't have any mechanical equipment in there. You just kind of let nature take its course. Well, nature did that. And the small infestation, I was there like when it was just a handful of trees. And since we couldn't do anything to control it, it grew bigger and bigger and bigger like that. So all that timber died and is now a huge, well, this was back in the mid-90s, a huge fire risk to neighbors. If a wildfire came, there's a lot of dead trees and things on the ground that could ignite and cause fire problems. That's what we were worried about for a long time. I don't think there's been devastation to neighbors due to fire after that, but that was a worry at the time.
Next slide. Everybody's back. There you go.
Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of forest management, kind of what people can do or what forest managers can do to help promote healthy ecosystems, healthy forests in those lands that they maintain. as well as private landowners too. Next slide, please. So as we discuss forest management, I think it's important to hit on two different sorts of ideologies regarding public land management, that being preservation versus conservation. And you may be well familiar with these two ideologies and what they entail, but essentially I like to compare the National Park Service compared to the United States Forest Service. Sometimes people often get these two agencies confused. Hey, they both manage public lands, they both do the same thing, but in fact these are two very different federal agencies that have two very different missions and purposes. So if we think of the National Park Service, we think of this preservation ideology, maybe not developed by John Muir, but certainly he is most well known for this. And the primary purpose of these lands is to remain in its natural state and allow nature to take its course. With that being said, it's, you know, the National Park Service does do timber sales, they do things like that, but the real driving force of the agency is kind of this preservation mindset. Now, this differs greatly as compared to the conservation ideology, kind of if we're thinking what the United States Forest Service does. Developed by Gifford Pinchot, he is considered the father of forestry, just like William Goodrich Jones is considered the father of forestry in Texas. Gifford Pinchot is considered the father of forestry here in the United States. This forest management certainly would not be what it is today without the foundation and the groundwork that he set. So this conservation ideology focuses on, you know, multiple use, that these public lands can be managed for multiple reasons, multiple different uses, that being recreation, range management, timber, watershed management, and wildlife. So a lot of that watershed management goes back to like ecosystem services, if you've heard of that term, kind of the things that nature provides, the services that nature does for us, without any human intervention at all. So something to consider, something to keep in mind when you're discussing forest management here. This obviously goes into much greater detail. Outside of timber management, there's a lot of different other public land management agencies, such as, you know, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, all sorts of different agencies that have different missions and purposes maintaining their lands. Next slide, please. Forest management objectives. And, you know, sometimes when you're managing forests, all you have to go out there and you have to just let the trees know who's the boss and what's going to happen here, just like this comic is telling us. And there can be different objectives when managing your forest. If you're looking at timber production here in the southeastern United States, then you're talking pine plantation. If you've been to the Jones State Forest, right close to our office, there's a 5-acre pine plantation there that's highly visited, highly used. And discussing pine plantations, we'll go into a little bit more of this process here later. But that involves things like site preparation, tree planting, thinning operations, herbicide applications, and prescribed burning. Other forest management objectives include recreation, such as camping, hiking, birding, forest aesthetics, wildlife habitat, watershed management, range management. If there's some sort of designated wilderness within those forest boundaries, that's important to manage those as wilderness areas. Also good investment opportunities, as well as wildfire prevention and mitigation. Always a good objective to have when you're managing trees and forests. Next slide, please. A lot of different activities can occur, can be recommended when you're managing forests. Those things include timber harvest. There's multiple different methods of timber harvest, from clear cutting to seed tree and shelter wood harvests. We talked a little bit about regeneration practices, those being site preparation, natural and artificial tree planting, and regeneration practices. Forest fertilization is not all too common, but it does sometimes occur. Commercial timber thinnings, timber stand improvement, enhancing the aesthetics and recreational use of the forest as well. Next slide, please. So when discussing site preparation, this is essentially preparing the seedbed for the next crop of trees. This is removing all the undesirable vegetation. This picture here is a shear blade mounted on a big bulldozer here. This machine comes through and rips away all the previous stumps and sort of other vegetative debris that's left behind. Depending on the soil type and moisture and region, it will determine what your weed population and weed species looks like. And there's a multitude of different site preparation practices that can occur when you're managing forested land. Those include like this heavy equipment here, as well as prescribed burning, herbicide applications, and other different types of manual labor and things. Next slide, please. Natural regeneration, this is going to be the cheapest method to reproduce a stand, where the next crop of trees is reproduced naturally from residual standing trees here. So we have a little timeline here, flow chart. We start with a mature stand. We go in, we harvest that stand using a seed tree cut method, where we select the best looking, biggest, tallest, straightest trees left on the tract. We leave about maybe 6 to 10 of those per acre, and then we cut the rest. And those seed trees are going to be responsible for reproducing our next crop of trees, as we see in the establishment phase. After the establishment phase, we go back to the removal cut, where we go in and remove those seed trees, so they're not overshading or competing with our next crop. And then you go in, you start tending the trees. Maybe you come in and do a thinning operation, things like that. And then you get to the mature stand phase and you repeat the process. So this natural regeneration process relies on available seed and existing seedlings to produce the new stand. And success will depend on if there's enough adequate seed distributed throughout the site, and requires very careful planning. Next slide, please. As opposed to artificial regeneration, where there's going to be a higher initial cost because you have to purchase the seedlings, and you also have to have those seedlings planted, but that does result, you are very less dependent on environmental conditions such as seed fall for success. And you can select specific traits to accomplish what you need to do to reach your forest management objectives. So these trees are selected to be the optimal growth, the straightest, less branches, fastest growing trees, and those are genetically selected through propagation practices and things like that. This is an entire industry growing tree seedlings. I mean, you could spend weeks discussing all this information. It's very interesting. If you want to learn more, definitely recommend looking into to the processes and the companies that do this tree seedling, tree nursery management. Next slide, please. Tree planting. So this is going to be artificial regeneration practices here, using a machine planter there as seen in the picture. You kind of have to look closely there, but there is a man sitting on the back of that tractor and the attachment there with a box of tree seedlings next to him. As the tractor goes up and down the rows, the guy in the back seat drops the tree seedlings into the ground at the appropriate spacing and density. It will be successful if the selected species is well adapted to the site and carefully planted. You don't want to have, you want to make sure that the tree is planted deep enough, but not too deep. You may want to make sure that there's no roots that are J-rooted or twisted, or that the tree is planted straight and aligned. And planting with the contours advised to protect water quality. Next slide, please. Weed control. This is discussing herbicide applications here. There's two different pictures here where, large scale commercial forestry, several hundred acres, you may see some sort of aerial herbicide applications with a helicopter. But most often than not, you'll see a ground application using a skidder, like seen there in that picture, or a bulldozer, or even sometimes backpack sprayers if it's that cost effective. But this can be done by a multitude of different reasons, with the objective of controlling grasses, brushes, and other weeds that will choke out or stunt the growth of our seedlings that we're either growing naturally or artificially. Next slide, please. Intermediate stand treatments. So once the stand has had some time to grow, we come in and do some of these intermediate stand treatments here. One of the most recommended and most popular being a thinning operation. And what the purpose of this is that trees need enough space to develop. And as the stand gets older, thinning may produce some income from those removed trees. So as trees start growing and competing with one another, as those crowns of the trees start touching one another, it's important to come in and reduce the competition, allow more sunlight to reach those crowns, And this operation is typically done in even age stands. It can also happen in uneven aged forest stands. But essentially, when the tree crowns become too dense and start shading each other out, this is when the thinning should occur. Failure to thin could cause growth rate and vigor to diminish rapidly. It can also lead to forest insects outbreaks, as well as if a wildfire were to go through into an unthinned stand, you would see much more devastating effects as opposed to a thin stand. Next slide, please. Timber stand improvement practices. This covers a wide range of management practices here. The one you're seeing here is hack and squirt method here. The person has a machete, he chops into the cambium layer of the tree and then sprays a herbicide into the cambium layer to kill off the tree. This is done on competing hardwoods, undesirable hardwoods that we do not want growing within the stand. Next slide, please. Prescribed burning. I talked a little bit about this in the Jones State Forest presentation here, but this lowers the risk of wildfire as well as the population of undesirable woody and brushy species. This also stimulates many native herbaceous species that provide food and cover for wildlife species. Prescribed burning is a very integral part of how we manage the Jones for RCW habitat, as well as other different species of wildlife. Next slide, please. Mature stand activities. So this is talking about forest harvesting. So we think about, I think probably the most recognizable and most iconic sort of association people make with forestry is this picture here is a clear-cut operation. And this is done on the entire stand where every tree is removed. It does create a drastic landscape change that some people may be objected to, but many valuable species must have full sunlight for regeneration. It's important to note here that if this harvest is occurring along any sort of water body, stream, or creek, that you should be using best management practices to dictate management along that body of water. The main purpose of a clear cut here is even age regeneration. So with a clear cut, this is going to involve artificial regeneration following that. So being that there are no trees left on the stand, you are going to have to come in and replant trees after this has occurred, as opposed to what we'll see on the next slide, which is a seed tree harvest. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where 4 to 10 of the highest quality seed producing trees are left on the stand, 4 to 10 per acre are left on the stand here. Careful planting is required to make sure that you have adequate seed fall for the next crop of trees. And of course here, you need to plan to go back in and remove those seed trees once the next crop of trees has reproduced and grown adequately. So this is going to be when we go back to our natural regeneration, where these trees are responsible for the next crop of trees to be grown. Next slide, please. Shelterwood is very similar to a seed tree harvest. Shelterwood just essentially it leaves much more trees per acre. Looking at 21 to 60 trees per acre are left, as opposed to that 4 to 10. Next slide, please. Best management practices. Donna may talk a little bit about this in her presentation, but this is kind of her wheelhouse and what she deals with on a daily basis. Best management practices here in Texas are voluntary forest management practices that are designed to enhance and protect water quality. And this includes things like streamside management zones. So when completing some of these timber harvests alongside stream bodies, it's important to establish streamside management zones. And essentially, these are buffers, and the minimum width is 50 feet on each side of the creek, from the edge of the creek, 50 feet going on either side of it. And this helps stabilize the stream banks, helps shade the water, and helps filter runoff and sedimentation into the streams. Also in best management practices is roads. Roads are the largest contributor of sedimentation and runoff into water bodies. So it's important that we have adequate water bars installed. We are installing wing ditches on some of these forest roads to help reduce that runoff and siltation into streams and creeks. Best management practices also discusses when you're looking at harvesting, reducing the amount of skid trails and reducing the amount of logging decks on site. And then replanting those either in food plots or seeding them to provide food for wildlife. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial image of what that streamside management zone looks like here. You can see a clear-cut operation has occurred, and then it looks like that they've come back in and replanted already. But again, those at least 50-foot width is left on either side of the creek. That forest canopy is there maintained to help promote and preserve water quality. This reduces the quantity of sediment and logging debris entering the streams during the harvesting operations. And this doesn't restrict all management activities, but it should be limited in this area to prevent pollution and erosion along the stream bank. Next slide. Water bars are used on forest roads. This is a drainage or diversion hump or ditch constructed across a road to intercept and divert surface runoff from roads to minimize erosion. So when we're talking about erosion, we want to reduce the velocity of water runoff, and we want to reduce the volume of water runoff. So water bars help us reduce the velocity as it comes down the road. Water bars help swing that off to the side. And as long as a proper wing ditch is installed with that water bar, you can help redistribute that water throughout the forest stand. These water bars are placed at a 30 to 45 degree angle along the road and divert runoff directly off of it. A good rule of thumb when installing water bars is kind of if you will hold your arm parallel to the ground, wherever your arm falls or wherever your hand is pointed to, you kind of want, as you look up slope, you want to install a water bar there. Just a general rule of thumb when you're looking at installing water bars. Next slide, please. Wing ditches accompanied with water bars are water turnout or a diversion ditch to direct water away from the road. These wing ditches typically make some sort of J hook upslope into the water, into the forest stand, and to prevent the momentum gain, prevent that velocity of water coming down the road. Next slide, please. Are there any questions? I think I saw a couple come up in chat. Probably want to address those real quick before we move on.
There were some questions. Sorry, this is Donna. On herbicide, I didn't know if you wanted to address that now or at the end. And then also a question about the best trees for stabilizing a stream bank. Do you want the herbicide questions?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so there's three here. What are the standards for decision making for herbicide application? What herbicides are used in the Forest Service? Does it include glyphosates? And in what situations are herbicides used? And how often? What are the effects on pollinators, wildlife, good bugs, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Herbicides are very tricky and require a lot of planning, and certainly you don't want to be using them just willy-nilly and just spraying whatever you want. It's important to note what crop species you're growing. So typically in East Texas, our crop species is going to be, of course, loblolly pine, some sort of species of pine. So once we've identified that, that will determine which chemicals, which time of the year, which season of the year we're using those chemicals. But typically, and it also depends on your location. So we do use herbicide applications on the Jones State Forest. We typically use them in those areas that we cannot prescribe burn in, or areas that are not good for burning. Chemicals that we use typically would be Garlon, XRT, or Remedy, Chopper, Gen 4, things like that. Some of these chemicals do contain glyphosate. They also contain chemicals like triclopyr, imazapyr, different chemicals like that. Also, timing of the year, the season of the year when you're spraying will also determine what kind of grasses and forbs grow back. There are, depending on your mix rate, depending on what chemicals you're using, those different chemicals will target, they'll target different sorts of species. They'll target the undesirable hardwoods, broadleaf species, but they won't kill like your native grass and things, depending on which chemical you're using. So it takes a lot of planning involved with that process. As long as you're using it appropriately, in accordance with the label and your objectives, it doesn't have devastating effects. And you want to add any more onto that, Donna? You may have some more insight into
Oh,
that.
yeah. And they asked about, like Connor said, it targets certain species or certain types of, like not the grasses or whatever may hit the broadleaf plants. And Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, but it always seems even after that, there are still plants out there that are nut producing or fruit producing of some sort that will still provide wildlife food.
Absolutely. Hard
and
and soft mass producers.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's still going to be something out there for food, for cover, for shelter, that sort of thing. So it doesn't just nuke the whole land. It doesn't do anything like that. It's pretty targeted. It's pretty specific. And things, especially in East Texas, tend to grow back pretty quickly. But there's always other species there that are going to cover those wildlife issues. And as far as blooming plants and things like that, depending on time of year, again, you're still going to always have some type of flowering plants out there as well.
Mm-hmm. We use a lot of this herbicide application when we're trying to control invasive species as well, especially on the Jones. We have very large, infestations of Chinese tallow, Japanese climbing fern, things like that we're trying to control constantly. Multiple herbicide applications to try and control that stuff. So that is a big driving force behind herbicide and prescribed burning on the forest landscape.
And someone asked about the best trees for stabilizing stream banks. They love American sycamore, but what trees are best together?
I guess when I'm thinking about planting along stream banks, I think of like bald cypress, things like that, kind of those species that like to get their feet wet. Hardwood species in particular is what I'm thinking of. Right.
Oh, and then, the $1 million question. What is the herbicide of choice for Chinese tallow?
I think that is an ongoing learning process between the rate and which chemicals you use. We're typically using some Mazapir Triclopyr mix, Chopper Gen 4 or Garlon XRT mixture rate. We have a great herbicide application tool. If you were to Google Texas Forest Info Portal, that website hosts all of the Texas Forest Service applications, and there is a herbicide application tool there that will, if you set a couple of filters there, will give you some suggestions on herbicide application rates, mixtures, things like that. But again, that's Texas Forest Info Portal. Just give that a Google, should be your first hit. Lots of different applications on that site too.
One more question. It says, on mature stands, what is the usual spacing for pine trees?
So when we're looking at mature stands, we want to use, we have this measurement called basal area. So basal area is kind of the measure of density across a stand. If you were to imagine stump cutting every tree on that in that stand, basal area is the measurement of square footage per acre of what that tree takes up. So an example, anything a basal area above 100 is going to tell me that stand or that group of trees is too thick. There's too many trees there. I need to reduce that. So our ideal range for me when I'm looking at forests, probably my ideal range for basal area would be anywhere between 60 to 80. Anything below 60 would tell me that we need to plant more trees within that stand. Again, anything above 100 telling me that there are too many trees. We need to come in and do some sort of thinning operation to reduce the competition.
Well, here's one more that came up. I hear there's a pellet gun that will inject herbicide pellet into a specific tree.
I'm not familiar with it. I'm sure there is. I'm most familiar with those broadcasts, tractor dozer sprayer things. I wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it seems that there's any sort of management practices or there's some sort of gun, pellet, air-powered device to do something these days. So. I think Donna's looking for that direct link for that herbicide tool to provide more guidance on that for y'all. If not, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna go ahead and continue on with forest health issues. So there are, this is just this list isn't everything, all the forest health issues in Texas, but these are probably some of the major ones that we deal with. The first one, if you've maybe visited Central or West Texas, you've seen oak wilt. Oak wilt is a huge concern in those areas of the state. Not too much of a concern in East Texas. It tends to be too humid and too wet, and our pine forest ecosystems don't really tolerate oak wilt too well. Or allow for oak wilt too well, excuse me. There's also things like hypoxylon canker. Donna mentioned pine bark beetles a little while ago when we were talking about southern pine beetle. Emerald ash borer. If you guys aren't familiar with this species, you should be. This thing is coming and coming quick. It's already in Texas, has been found in numerous counties in Texas. And then there's Texas leaf cutting ant too. So next slide, please. Pine bark beetles, we talked about southern pine beetle. Like Donna said, we haven't had a southern pine beetle outbreak since I want to say the mid 90s, Donna. Correct me on that if I'm wrong.
The worst one ever was in 85. That was before
85.
my time. I started in 90, and we've had some pretty big ones in 95, 93, 95, and others. But I'm trying to remember even the last time they caught one in a trap. It's been 10 or 12 years. I don't have that exact number because I don't do that anymore, but it's been a while since they even caught one in a trap. But
like Donna said, we are trapping for southern pine beetle every single year. That's a big role of what the foresters in East Texas are doing, is setting out southern pine beetle traps as well as emerald ash borer traps to detect when those species are infesting our forested lands. When you're looking at, you've probably had one of your pine trees infested with bark beetle, it was most often than not either the black turpentine beetle or some sort of species of Ips beetle. These pine beetles target weak individual trees, things that the trees is maybe stressing from drought conditions or too much water, things like that. These types of pine beetles target those weaker stressed trees and don't cause widespread destruction like the southern pine beetle does. But with that being said, pine bark beetles are the biggest threat to commercial forests in East Texas. By far the biggest threat to those commercial forests. Next slide. Here's some more pictures of what that southern pine beetle damage can look like. There's a picture of what the southern pine beetle looks like, as well as that same picture of I think, what did you say, Donna, 1993-ish? Dr. Billings took that picture.
I think so, 93 or maybe a couple years before that. It was early on in my pine beetle. But I think that one's Indian Mound Wilderness on the Sabine National Forest. I should know that from memory, but it killed 10,000 acres out of 12,000 acres of the wilderness area.
Yeah.
If y'all didn't hear me talk about it before, it's the reason it got that large, because we can control them if we find them quick enough. But it got that large because it's on a designated wilderness area where we can't go in and do regular forest management. We can't go in and cut away some of the trees or do any other application that helps prevent it from spreading so large.
A couple other pictures there below the southern pine beetle. You'll see those pitch tubes, we call them, coming out of the sides of the tree. This is like the waste of the beetle that's ejected out of the side of the tree. Pretty indicative sign of a pine beetle infestation. And then you'll see underneath the bark there that kind of those S galleries that the beetle's making as he chews his way through the resin and different layers of the tree. Next slide, please. Emerald ash borers. So there's very kind of pretty greenish emerald color of the beetle itself. Excuse me, of the emerald ash borer. This is what one of the traps looks like there on the picture on the right. You may have seen these. I typically do 8 of these traps throughout Montgomery County every year. You may have come across one, maybe seen someone hanging in a tree somewhere. They're scattered across East Texas, across the state, to detect this species. There is no known treatment currently to kill emerald ash borer. So again, all these traps are doing is detecting the species of when it is occurring. But emerald ash borer has been a big problem in the country for some time now. and has slowly made its way west as it continues across the landscape. Targeting, of course, those ash trees. Next slide, please. You can see here just what that damage looks like. This is an example from Toledo, Ohio, looking down a residential street. Picture on the left looking at June 2006, and then picture on the right there looking at August 2009, after an emerald ash borer infestation has occurred there. The biggest recommendation here for urban forest managers here is that the emerald ash borer is coming. There's probably very little that we can do. It's important to recognize that. We should probably start removing those trees, and we should promote diversity amongst our tree species within our urban forest environments. So we shouldn't have one tree species that dominates the urban communities. We should have a multitude of a mix of good species there, so that these pests that target these different types of species can't take out every tree across the urban communities. Next slide, please. Emerald ash borer in Texas here, you can see, I think this map is a little old, a little outdated when I made this presentation here. There may be a couple more counties that should be added to this. But the most surprising would be Tarrant County. This was detected in 2018. The original detections of EAB occurred in April 2016 in Harrison County there in Northeast Texas, as the emerald ash borer made its way from Louisiana, Arkansas area. And then it was detected in 2018. Very interesting story about that detection. A young boy using the iNaturalist app took a picture of the emerald ash borer, and it was not recognized until several years later down the line. Then it was found in Tarrant County. But interesting thing here is that emerald ash borer has not been detected in counties in between Harrison and Tarrant County. So the question remains of how did emerald ash borer make its way to Tarrant County? You'd think that if it made its way all the way to Tarrant, you'd think we would have detected it in counties in between then. But I think there's a good explanation here on the next slide of what that probably looks like, what the real reason is. That I-20 corridor there, probably somebody moving firewood or somebody bringing firewood back from some sort of, maybe from Louisiana all the way working towards the Metroplex there, is probably the real reason why. Funny comic there of how that tends to happen. People moving firewood from different locations there. So unfortunately, this does happen. You'll see a lot of promotion of burn it where you cut it, burn it where you buy it kind of things, and not transporting firewood across state lines or even across county lines, things like that. Next slide, please. Wildfires in Texas. So almost done here. We're going to talk about wildfire damage across the landscape here in Texas, and kind of TFS's role in preventing and managing those wildfires. So some of you are probably well familiar with the 2011 fire season. Texas witnessed its most destructive wildfire season during this 2011 fire season. These pictures here are from the Bastrop County Complex wildfire. Across the state, in 2011, over 3.5 million acres were burned, 3,000 homes destroyed. But with that being said, 35,000 plus homes were saved by firefighters. That picture there from September of 2011 is a very iconic picture in Bastrop of what that wildfire season looked like, what wildfire damage looked like. And then picture on the right looking at Bastrop State Park in the Bastrop area, how widespread that damage was. Next slide, please.
The Lost Pines of Bastrop were an oasis. It was a population of pine trees where populations of pine trees should never have existed. People who come on it surprised. It had its own character, it had its own climate, it had its own sound, it had its own smell, and people wanted to build their lives around it.
So in 2011, we had the worst fire in Texas history come through Bastrop County, the Bastrop County Complex Fire. That fire was over 34,000 acres. It burned through Bastrop State Park and burned 96% of the state park with varying intensities.
The wildfire came through this area, very, very dry vegetation. The moisture content within these loblolly pines was extremely low, extremely volatile. When the fire came in, it moved very aggressively, very quickly. A very high intensity fire by all means.
Once the fire blew through the area, we immediately started planning on, how are we going to take this forest forward into the future? How are we going to continue to have the Lost Pines of Texas? And so that reforestation process really became a very community-based approach. Many different entities from state agencies, the local community, private partnerships, they came together and we made a reforestation plan.
I think the stewardship component is very evident in this project because of the reforestation effort. A seedling placed into a hand of a grieving property owner, it has a very medicinal effect, it seems, a very calming effect, and provides hope.
That replanting effort really gave the emphasis to move that forward. It gave people that hope, and it brought back landscape and ecology that identifies this community. The success of it was huge. Not only in actually getting trees replanted and regrowing, but in keeping the community together as one.
We learned a lot about ourselves, we learned a lot about each other, but the important thing is we learned how effective we can be working together. There was not a lot of I's, but a lot of we's involved, and we're very honored to have been a part of it.
So if you're not familiar with the Bastrop area, again, like I said in the video, the Bastrop area is kind of considered the Lost Pines area, where pine trees grow, where we wouldn't expect them to grow. This is due to glacial movement thousands of years ago. And the 2011 wildfire season had a drastic impact on that area. You can still drive through there today and see remnants and fire scars of that season. But through natural regeneration and some of these artificial like Aggie replant projects, I'm hoping to restore the ecosystem in the area to what it had looked like before. Next slide, please. So going to have a brief summary here of, kind of what, and kind of looking towards the future, kind of maybe I'm probably don't want to take comments on this, but maybe just things to get your mind working, and some questions, maybe some things to consider regarding the forests here in Texas. Next slide, please. So looking at population growth and urbanization across the state, something that gets your mind working here. What are communities prepared to deal with the effect that population will have on forest resources? Looking at Central Texas woodlands in particular, this area is threatened by continuing land fragmentation, wildfire, oak wilt. What partnerships can be made to help protect this critical ecoregion? East Texas in particular, how will rapid urbanization occurring across Southeast Texas in particular, what impact will that have across the wood sector? We talked about the forest industry sector, what an impact that has in our local counties and communities, provides millions of dollars of revenue and payroll, and provides thousands of jobs across East Texas. And as these communities continue to increase and urbanize, these populations are going to require clean water, and forest ecoregions and forest environments play a huge role in filtering this water, and what can we do to ensure that there is enough in the future? Wildfires and public safety. Wildfires are a constant growing threat across the state. What things can be done across the state, across East Texas, across Central and West Texas? What can be done to help minimize their impacts? And then looking at urban forest communities, the urban forest canopy provides all sorts of different values and benefits to our local communities, and environmental benefits alone. And what can cities do to promote more green spaces, embrace these trees, and embrace that urban forest canopy? So just some things to consider as we look forward to the future, as we continue to maintain and manage our both rural and urban forest environments. Next slide, please. volunteer opportunities, discuss this a little bit. If you're interested, next slide, please. If you're interested in volunteering on the Jones or volunteering with us, if you haven't met Caroline Cruz in the Conroe office yet, highly recommend it. She is our conservation education coordinator. She is always looking for helpful people that are interested in maybe teaching or assisting with field trips on the forest as we look. Looks like we're going to be able to do that again here in the near future. That is her contact information if you're ever interested in doing that. Next slide, please. With that being said, that's going to be it for me today. That's my email address. If you have any more questions, I'll stick around here for a couple more minutes here if I can answer any more. If anybody has any more questions.
Somebody just said show the previous screen that had Caroline's information on it.
Okay, let me go back there.
And then also, Connor, somebody, when you talked about the not moving firewood between states and counties, someone mentioned something about that being the same with horse shavings for horses. And then somebody else asked, what about mulch? So do you have any insight on horse shavings and mulch and moving that and possibly harboring forest insect pests?
I hadn't really considered horse shavings or mulch before, but that stuff tends to be pretty well processed to a certain extent and pretty well packaged. So I probably wouldn't have as much of a concern with that as I would with like traditional raw firewood.
Good point.
Connor, I want to thank you so much for meeting with us today, for taking the time to come and teach us, considering that we are that you are way out there in the Guadalupe Mountains handling wildfire.
Well, again, sorry for the audio issues throughout the presentation, but hope everybody learned anything. If you're interested, please come out on Tuesday mornings. I'm typically try to get out there and help the volunteers maintain our flower beds and things like that. So thank you again. I'm going to go back to work here. Feel free to let me know if you have any more questions.
Thanks, Connor.
Take some photos. Take some photos.
Yeah, and be safe.
Yes, yeah, that too.
And as Connor mentioned, we do have, we are thinking about starting a trash pickup crew. And I saw in the chat that we had several comments about people wanting to get up there and do that. I am so thankful for all of you wanting to step forward and help us keep our local forest healthy. So Donna, are you ready to start your program?
Sure.
I'm going to stop my share.
Okay. Let's see if we can pull this off again. I'll start a share and sharing sound and optimize for video clip just in case, and screen 3. And yay. So it's in video mode for you?
It is. It's
okay.
Perfect.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, my name is Donna Work, obviously with the Texas A&M Forest Service. I'm a biologist. My degree is in wildlife biology from Texas A&M University. I can't hear any whoops, but I'm sure some of y'all are. But I've been with Texas A&M Forest Service for 30 years, started off in forest insect pests and got into the water quality portion of it. So my job still consists of a lot of variety. I work with our water resources program where we talk to loggers and landowners and urge them to use good sound logging practices that protect the soil and water. I do newsletters, lots of education programs, and especially love it with the kids and adults in person. We're doing what we can now. And but then I also work with our endangered species on our state forest, the red cockaded woodpecker, and represent Texas A&M Forest Service on different committees like the Texas Black Bear Alliance and Longleaf Task Force. And I go to Louisiana pine snake meetings and things like that. So I have quite a wide variety in my work. I really enjoy it. So I'm going to see if right now, if this works, if the little sound will work for my red cockaded woodpecker here. So that sounds like a couple red cockaded woodpeckers pecking on a tree, trying to find some insects or other critters that are under the bark and everything. And as you look at it, you can see that it is we maybe can't see that it is small, but it's a fairly small black and white woodpecker. There's other woodpeckers that we have in Texas, but the ones that are more easily confused are the downy woodpecker, which is a little smaller than the red cockaded woodpecker. Downy is about 6.5 inches tall. It's got black spots on the white tail feathers. I think I have a little graphic. There we go. On the white tail feathers, got a little black spot there. The hairy woodpecker is actually larger than the red cockaded woodpecker, about 9.5 inches tall, and no black spots on its tail feathers. Red cockaded woodpecker is about 8.5 inches tall and has the solid white cheek patch right there on the side. The downy and the hairy woodpecker both have a slash of black, a streak of black, but that goes through their white cheek patch. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, so this is red cockaded woodpecker. It's has what looks like a ladder back on the back of it, little specks across the back of it. Unlike the red-headed woodpecker, when we say red cockaded woodpecker, they say, "Oh, I see that all the time." You know, I see that nice red head, or I see it at my grandma's bird feeder or something like that. Well, if you see the red, it's probably not the red cockaded woodpecker, and the red-headed woodpecker is going to have the solid red head and the black and white tuxedo-looking rest of the body. Here they have a ladder back, is actually spotted feathers that are across the back of it. Okay, I'm trying to find the right place to click. Okay. And this is the side view, and you can see that little cheek patch right there. And the male is the only one that has any white at all on its head. It's a little tiny patch of feathers. It's behind the eye, really hard to see in the field unless you have them in the hand like this, unless they're pretty close by, they're agitated or they're scratching and their feathers are fluffed up and the sun's hitting you just right. So it's really hard to see that red patch there. The female looks just like him, but has no red at all. Now this is a juvenile that was hatched the year this picture was taken. So when they start getting their first set of feathers in, then the males are going to have a red patch on top of their head, not by the eye, but on top of their head. The female will have just a solid black head. Then after they lose their first feathers during their first molt in September, October, and start getting in their adult feathers, once they're feathered out, then there's no more red on top of the juvenile male's head, but it is the red spot on the back, on the side of the head. Now this, you may recognize this, or at least the artist, John James Audubon here, and I put this in here. It's got a good depiction of red cockaded woodpeckers. I see two males here because you can see the little streak of red on their side. And I might have put this in here out of interest as I was kind of researching some of his work and how he gets his paintings so realistic. I came up with this, I found this story and I thought it was really interesting. So he describes the species, which is first described by Wilson, is found abundantly from Texas to New Jersey and island as far as Tennessee. So you can see how widespread they were in the past and I'll show you a map here in a minute of their distribution, but how widespread they were in the past. And if he had not, if he didn't see any, he would make a note of that sort of thing. And then he tells this story. It says, near Bayou Sarah in Louisiana, I once slightly wounded two males, which I put into my hat in order to carry them home. The first, on being brought to the ground, was easily secured, but the case was different with the other, for it once hopped off towards the nearest tree, crying loudly all the while, and on reaching it, ascended as if unhurt. However, I obtained it by accidentally knocking off the bark with a clod of earth. It defended itself courageously and pecked at my fingers with so much vigor that I was obliged to let it drop several times out of my hand. And I chuckle at that because if I did that nowadays, I would be like buried under the jail for doing that sort of thing. You have to, of course, with endangered species, you have to have permits and trainings and certain things you can and can't do. And that certainly is one of those cases. Okay, Okay, let me go right here. Okay, so this is their historic distribution. You can see on it well up into Oklahoma and Missouri, even Kentucky, Tennessee, all the way up to Delaware, that sort of thing. So you can see their distribution way back originally. And then these are the states right here. If you take out Tennessee, Kentucky, they're no longer there. These are the states that they are in right now. It's currently in 11 states. They're been totally extirpated from New Jersey, Maryland, Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Years ago, there were some still in Kentucky, but bark beetles or something killed all the trees in their area. So with their live pine tree habitat gone, those birds were captured and moved down south. So after that, there was no more habitat for the woodpeckers and no more red cockaded woodpeckers up there. So they're currently just in these states right here. In East Texas, our historic distribution is this area here in the pink. And nowadays, in fact, this needs to be updated because this is the current distribution. And if you take out Nacogdoches County, which we don't believe there's any more there as well, not sure about Polk County. I don't think there's any more there. The last ones I believe were on the Indian reservation. Not sure that they're there anymore. So this is the type of habitat they are adapted to living in. These large, mature, open pine forests. And this is an old photo right here. These are what the pine forests looked like before. So this is what they are adapted to living in. And like most endangered species, their reason for becoming endangered is loss of habitat. And so in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the settlers coming across the land, they cut down the pine trees. They either used them to build barns, houses, corrals, cleared the land for planting gardens and grazing cattle, that sort of thing. So that's back in the day before they knew that. It took them a while to realize, hey, if we don't stop this, or if we don't do something about this, then we're not going to have any more trees left. So back when trees were real abundant, then they weren't thinking of that. But then they started about the 1930s, they started saying, hey, we need to not do this without planting trees back. So it's what we do now. Now we plant, a true forestry operation is where we harvest the trees and then plant the trees back. So the trees that we see now that are woodpecker habitat, or the forests that we see now, are a few generations removed from this. And this nowadays is what their habitat would look like, a good red cockaded woodpecker habitat, large mature pine trees and a nice herbaceous layer, not much mid-story. That's the bushes and the small trees and things that grow up kind of in between the bottom layer of the forest and the top layer of the forest. They don't like it crowded and dense. That makes it hard for them to fly through. If they're being pursued by a predator, a hawk or something, it makes it more easy for other predators to get into their cavity trees. So this is the type of habitat that they like. And they are the only woodpecker that builds their cavities in large, mature pine trees, live pine trees. Other woodpeckers can use pine trees, but they're usually dead unless they're taking over the cavity that a red cockaded woodpecker has built. This is a conch. They choose the large mature pine trees because they need the space inside for their cavity. And a lot of the larger mature pine trees have a disease called red heart rot. And that is a fungus that kind of softens up the center of the tree. And that fungus sometimes manifests itself as a conch or like a mushroom on the side of the tree. This is what a tree that had red heart rot would look like. So the heartwood that's normally strong and stout is softened a little bit. It's made more porous, more spongy. And so if you're picking your beak against a tree and get through the bark layer and through the wood, if you get to the center of it, you want it to be as soft and easy as possible to excavate a cavity. This is what we call a start tree. It's a round, whole, soft, probably about close to 2 inches across. And this is where the woodpeckers have started to build a cavity in a live pine tree. You see the sap flowing there. It can take them a year or so to build these cavities. If they really get after it, it takes several months, but usually averages a year or more to build these cavities. So you can see they're a big commodity and an important resource for these birds. This is a completed cavity shown close up. And so they've already built all the way through the middle of the tree and excavated downwards into the tree. Since it is complete and it looks like the woodpecker is using this tree now to roost in at night, you can see the little, where they've pecked what we call little resin wells, little sap wells through the bark. You get through the bark layer and that thin layer that produces the sap, then it's going to exude the sap there on the surface. Looks kind of like melted candle wax. And you'll see that in some of our other photos here. And that is to protect them from their major predator, the rat snake. It also acts as a banner for other woodpeckers to say, hey, this is my territory, keep out. It gives them a nice visual that they can go to if they're flying and they have to get away from a predator, and can just pop right into that 2-inch across hole. So you see the sap flowing more here. They've been using this cavity a little bit more. Another close-up of that. And this is an extreme close-up. Looks like they've been using this one for a while. It's going to lead to the center of the tree and then go down about 6, 8, 9 inches. This is a natural cavity that the woodpeckers did build. I don't think I have a pointer. There's probably a pointer, but I'm afraid to try it. Pin and laser pointer. Let's see. Laser pointer. I'll try. Right? Can y'all see that? I don't know. But anyway, it's going to slope down this way to help keep rainwater out of that. And again, this hole is about 2 inches in diameter, goes into the center or the heartwood and goes back down. They don't use much nesting material because, I don't know why, but they don't use much nesting material. It's not going to be like they bring in feathers or leaves or pine straw or anything. They will sometimes peck on the edge of the tree and of the inside of the cavity and just have little bark shavings in there, and that's all they have, even during nesting season. So a good management tool for, a good management tool for these birds, as I said, that's a huge commodity for these birds and takes a long period of time for them to excavate a cavity. And it's important for them to have cavities to roost in at night, are these artificial inserts. I believe it was 1990 back, after Hurricane Hugo on the East Coast, where they lost a lot of red cockaded woodpecker cavity trees. A lot of damage was done over there. So there's those homes that take a year or more to build are gone. So they came up with these artificial cavities. We call them inserts. And this one has the armature on the front of it. And now they put in a PVC pipe liner right inside there. That keeps other woodpeckers like the red-bellied woodpecker and the pileated woodpecker from coming in, enlarging that hole for their own purposes to use and taking over that cavity. It's like this, so the birds can still hang on to the edge of it if they're feeding young or whatever, just sitting there, but it helps keep other woodpeckers out. So this is what the artificial cavity looks like on the inside. And so it's similar in dimensions, it's similar in look. This is eastern red cedar with a plywood top, and they take a hole saw and drill down this way and then drill another one in this way and sometimes put in the PVC pipe. So it's very similar to what the other ones, the natural cavities, look like. And this is a cavity, an artificial cavity that's been installed, and this is what it looks like on the inside. So very similar in structure and everything to the others. How those are put in is we find a large mature pine tree. Somebody gets up there with a short barred chainsaw and cuts out the rectangle for the tree. First he puts up the little artificial cavity, makes a little mark, pencil mark around it to know where to cut, and cuts out the rectangle in the tree. And it's going to look like this. So after he cuts that rectangle, they end up doing some little cross hatching to just take out chunks. And then with a chisel and hammer and things like that, they can take out the rest of the chunks. So now you have a rectangle like this. It does not kill the tree. Some people used to say, oh, that kills the tree. It does not. You're not cutting off the entire vascular system of the tree, just that one little spot there. The tree will live for many, many years after that is done. But it does tend to make the tree a little weaker. So in high windstorms, if the tree snaps off, it tends to snap off in that area right there. This is a cross section of what an installed artificial insert looks like in the tree. So you can see that in windstorms that could break off a little more easily. Once the artificial cavity is put in and flush with the outside of the tree, then we doctor it up to make it look pretty natural. There's been putty already installed on the cavity itself, the artificial cavity, before it's pushed in there, so no sap seeps into it. And then same right here, putting the putty on the front. And after that, they will paint it brown to make it look like the rest of the tree. And then the little white streaks are either paint or putty are put up there. And that is so it'll catch the woodpecker's eye. It kind of mimics the natural sap that the woodpeckers are going to put on there, the natural sap that's going to flow from their resin wells and catch their attention. So on our state forest and on the national forest, we have all the cavity trees marked. So we use the green paint on the cavity trees. National Forest use white now, but we use this green paint on there. We give each one an individual number just for our cataloging purposes and for our management purposes. So that if you see these on the forest with the green paint on it, it does not necessarily mean the woodpeckers are using it right then and that they are actively using it at that time, but they've used it at least at some point, but we still leave it standing in case they come back to it. And this type of area right here, you'll see these are all artificial cavities that were put in for one of our translocation projects onto the Fairchild State Forest. I'll talk more about that later. But this is an area that had natural trees for a long time. The woodpeckers left it many years ago, and the other trees are old. The cavities have been enlarged. They were unusable by red cockaded woodpeckers. So we had artificial cavities put in that we could move birds from another population and put them into here. And then we gave them the green bands, and that's what this is. So any stand of trees that has either artificial or natural cavity trees for red cockaded woodpeckers is called a cluster. So the cluster consists of the actual trees that are red cockaded woodpecker trees, whether they're using them or not, whether they're artificial or not, and then the surrounding trees around them. So we put like a 200-foot buffer, or it's not a physical buffer we put in unless we flag it, but it's just we maintain that cluster area. And by definition, there's a 200-foot buffer around the outermost parts of these trees. And there are certain management practices you can and cannot do within this cluster area during nesting season. So typically a group of woodpeckers ideally is going to be a breeding male, a breeding female, and a helper bird or two. And these helper birds are often males offsprings of the previous year's hatches. So they help to defend the territory. They help to incubate eggs if there's eggs in the nest. They help to feed the young if there's young. And they're actually waiting around to wait for dad to kick off so they can take up the top breeding spot, get their own female, and carry on the family that way. So in the mornings, every morning, no matter what time of year it is, they get up. I say they're one of the last birds to get up. And if it's a cold day, they wait even longer. If it's cold, wet, rainy day, and I'm sitting out there waiting to count them, they take even longer to do. But they get up usually after the other birds, a little bit after daybreak, and they go out, they call to each other. The family congregates at the male's cavity tree. There's going to be one bird per cavity, a male in his one cavity, the female in another cavity. Helper birds have their own individual cavities elsewhere in the area, and that's where they roost in at night. But they all congregate in the morning at the male's cavity tree. And since we know that little aspect of their daily routine, that's when's the best time to count them. So I will go out there. I know which one is the male's cavity tree, and I will stand a little ways from the tree and wait for them to wake up and come calling to each other. And I count how many birds come in, either by sight and or by sound. And then they go off foraging on the forest. And they're going to forage. That means looking for food, mainly on pine trees. And they're going to flake off the bark. In this instance, in this photo, it's a dead tree and it has some insect larvae in it. So after the tree died, other insects came in and laid their larvae in it. So it's a buffet for them. And so this found a nice grub worm here. So they will flake off the bark or peck through the bark to get to any insect larvae, find any ants, centipedes, scorpions, whatever else is under the bark. They'll also forage some on oak trees, and there's also a little bit of berry in their diet. But most of their diet is going to be other arthropods that they find on pine trees. Now this right here, I've talked about the family working together. This here is an adult, and the bird with its head sticking out is a juvenile. And if that juvenile has his head stuck out that far, can reach that high, that tells me he's just about getting ready to fledge, to leave the nest. So during this time of year, they are nesting. They start exhibiting nesting behaviors sometimes in March, but around here, about mid-April, they start laying eggs and go on through the month of May. Sometimes if they lose a clutch of eggs, they'll go on into June with nesting a little bit. But that's what's going on right now. And that's part of my job, is going to monitor those on our state forest and to monitor to see who's nesting and are they laying eggs, and are the eggs hatching? Are they fledging, leaving the nest successfully, and that sort of thing. So one of my tools to do that is this thing called a peeper scope. And it's basically on a telescoping pole that is like, I think linemen use it and other people use it for measuring heights of trees and things. So it's a telescoping pole, but this one's modified on the end of it. It has, you can't quite see the probe here, but there's a probe on the end that's got lights and a camera in it. And that's hooked up here. I have to get it inside that cavity there from the ground. And this cable goes down to a monitor. And I've got a picture of the monitor right here. So here's the probe has been into the tree, and I turn on my monitor, turn on the lights, camera, and we got some action here so we can see what's in the tree. That keeps me from having to climb the tree. In the old days, to see if I suspected nesting or something, I would have to get the climbing ladders and a drop light and a little tool like the dentist uses to look into your mouth, or a mechanic uses it to see down in an engine, to put the little drop light in there and use my mirror to see what's in the cavity. So that was very labor intensive and a big headache. So when I was able to receive one of these, it was a very joyous time. So you can see right here, there's eggs in this one. So I can see those eggs, and typically they will lay, they can lay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eggs, sometimes even more. I typically see 3 eggs. Sometimes I see 4 eggs. I've seen 5 before, but not all of them hatch. Sometimes with 4, also not all of them hatch. But I've seen 4 eggs hatch and 4 young survive and live to fledge. But most of the time, I'm going to have 3 and then have 2 or 3 young there in the cavity. Just another view of the eggs. Another view here. And if the monitoring I do nowadays, I try to get down to each forest at least once a week, sometimes more often if I need more information. Excuse me. And if I get there if I'm lucky and I peeper the tree, use the peeper scope, I see 1 egg, I know they lay 1 egg per day until they're through laying, and then they sit on the eggs and incubate them. So if I see 1 egg, I say, aha, that gives me the information I need. I don't have to come back till next week or so to come check. So if I go back the next week and I say 3 eggs in there, okay, I know which day they laid 1. So I know the next day they laid 2, the next day laid 3. So after that, I can start the incubation time clock. And then they start incubating the eggs, sitting on the eggs. And 10 to 12 days after that is when the eggs hatch. So here's a photo. Most of the time when I come up to a tree, they hear me. They hear us coming. When I start putting the peeper scope up there, if there's anybody sitting on eggs or in the cavity with the young or whatever, they will fly out, but not always does that happen. Sometimes out of fear or courage, I don't know which it is, they hunker down and sit on those eggs, and I catch an adult in there. So this adult is sitting on obviously 1. I think I see a 2nd egg in there. So sometimes that messes up with me counting to know how many eggs in there. But if I knew how many eggs were already in there, that's okay. I just peek in there. Okay, they still are not hatched, and I'll come back next week and check on them. This is an awesome photo taken by our beloved Debbie Layer. For those of you who knew her, we lost her last year, and she was very helpful out there on the forest when I did a lot of things, and she took awesome photos. And this is one of her photos. I think this is a once in a lifetime catch of a photo. I call it shift change. So when there's eggs in the cavity, the female lays her eggs in the male's cavity tree. And that's because it's usually the newest tree, the freshest, the best resin producer, the most protective tree from the rat snake. So the female lays her eggs in the male's cavity tree. At night, That's where he's going to go to roost. The female's going to go to her roost tree. A helper bird is going to go to its roost tree, and the male's going to go to his roost tree. So overnight, he's sitting on the eggs. During the day, then the female, and if there's any helper birds, they're going to take turns sitting on the eggs while the others go foraging for food. And so they're going to take turns. So to me, having a bird come out and this one right at the entrance there, that tells me they may be making that shift on who's incubating the eggs or possibly who's feeding the young. But I'm thinking probably this was the one on the top that's flying out. They're not really yellow on the bottom. I think this is something to do with lighting. But the one that was sitting on the eggs flew out of there, and the other one is getting ready to take over the shift. And again, in 10 or 12 days, the eggs start hatching. This is a very young one that is hatched right here. The others haven't even hatched out yet. It's fortunate this year, every great once in a while I'm there while they're hatching out. This year on the Fairchild, we peepered and there was 2 young there, and one of them, his little rear end was still in the eggshell. So I'm thinking they just hatched out that morning and haven't even got free of the shells yet. And this is a cool one right here where there's one already out and another one maybe trying to pip to get out. So that's pretty neat. They keep the cavity very tidy. This is a fecal sac that one of the adult birds is taking out. So when the young go to the bathroom, they just throw out the fecal sac that's got the tidy little excrement there and just tosses it out the cavity. And so once the eggs are hatched and we have the young, they're going to need to be fed. So everybody in the family takes turns going out foraging, yes, getting their own food, but also getting insect larvae to come back and feed the little ones. And this is a peepers peeped in there and saw this young one right here. This one's probably 8 days old, 8 or 9 days old, probably 8 days old. And so starting to get feathers on the wings and on the back in different places. So I have a chart that helps me age them when I see how the feathering's coming out, where the quills are and that sort of thing that help me to age the birds. Again, here's another one that's peeking out. Debbie also took this photo. She was there when the parents were feeding. And again, this was peeking out. And I think in this photo, you can kind of see top of his head and male or female. That's a male because you see the little red spot on top of it. Again, he's probably close to fledging age. After the eggs hatch, and the young will fledge in about 26 days. So 26 days, they fledge, they leave the nest, they go out in the tops of the trees. The adults will still, for the first several days, go out and find food for them and bring that to them. But then they have to learn to fly with the family on their own and find food with them. They also have to find their own cavity to dwell in at night, or they're pretty susceptible to the predators. This is when the adults come in to feed that little one. So as part of my management of the red cockaded woodpecker, we put bands on them, just like you would see on geese. Red cockaded woodpeckers are not migratory, but we do put bands on them for identification purposes, and especially on a forest where we're moving birds to and from on the forest, we need to have all the information we can on them. So the way that I capture my young and band the young, you can band them once they're fledged and in their own cavity. You can band adults, and there's different ways to capture those. But this way, when I'm capturing the nestlings, is I have a soft piece of surgical tubing. I don't think I've got a good picture where you can actually see that. There may be one here in a minute. And it's got 50-pound test fishing line on the end of it. And I've got it in 3 different loops. I climb up the tree. These are my Swedish climbing ladders made for climbing trees like this. I've got a climbing belt that has a harness around my waist and around my legs. And with that, standing on the steps of the ladder and with that belt around the side of the tree, when I lean back, my weight helps to hold me up on that tree, and I've got both hands to work with. So I stick that noose down in the tree. If we have time to see the video, you may get to see that. And I try to lasso the birds, usually one at a time. And when I get them out, you can kind of see the feet of this one sticking up. So I've got the little bird, that's my little surgical tubing that's got the bottom part of the fishing line here. I've had to pull back to lasso him. And then I take the noose off, put him in a soft little velvet bag, and lower that one, and then the others that I catch out of the nest down to the ground. Someone holds them and takes care of the bag and keeps them in the shade until I can come down and actually do the banding. So I have banding pliers. We have the regular aluminum bands that had the number on them, just like with ducks and geese and other banded birds. Each bird has their unique number there on there. I'm in charge of all those numbers that they give me there. And then since most of the time when we see these birds, it's going to be out in the field and with binoculars or spotting scopes. So with binoculars or spotting scopes, it is impossible to see the little number on those little silver bands, but we can put on auxiliary bands like these colored ones here, put them on the legs in different color combinations, and you can often see those colors. And if you see the colors and the combinations and which leg is which, has what colors, then we can check records. If any birders are out there and they see a color combination, I ask for that so I can see which bird it is. Is it one that was hatched on the forest? Was it seen in the area where we released it or where it was hatched? Or did it come from another forest? And so this is what they look like after they have all their jewelry on. And these are 7 or 8 day old chicks. That's when I like to band them. Their legs are long enough to fit all 3 bands that they want us to put now on one leg, and then the 2 bands, the silver and another colored band on the other leg. They're banded for life here. Their legs maybe get a little longer as they get older, but not any wider. It's not much wider. So they're banded for life once I put these on there like that. Once I'm done, we put them back in the little bag. I climb back up in the tree. I left my letters on the tree. I climb back up in the tree and pull them out of the bag, and one at a time, push them down in that little cavity and let the little gummy bear bodies tumble down to the bottom. And after that, once I have my ladders off the tree, then the adults start coming back and feeding them again. So here you can see this is a very good active tree. It's got the telltale signs of of course, the woodpecker. I know the woodpeckers are using it here, but this is a good close up where you can see the reddish brown bark that you can see where they pick through the bark to get to the sap layer. It's not gray like the rest of the tree is going to be gray where they haven't flaked away bark or haven't pecked through it. Nice shiny sap there as well. So once my ladders are down, here come the adults back, going back and feeding the birds. Now they do have predators that are a problem. Believe it or not, this nice, soft, cute little silky flying squirrels are a predator. They can be a problem. One thing, they are cavity dwellers. They are nocturnal, so they do their thing at night. So during the day, if they find this ready-made cavity that they didn't have to do anything for, they're going to take it over. So the birds are gone during the day, and these flying squirrels come up and, hey, they're gone. I'm going to come in here and take it over. And they're bad during nesting season. Well, even before nesting season, if they take this over and mess it up, get it real grungy. I've seen a video of a red cockaded woodpecker up there and trying to get into the nest, and the flying squirrel just comes out with bared teeth and claws, and the woodpecker can't defend itself against that, so it leaves. So it's without a tree, and also it's without a place to lay eggs if it's the male's cavity tree. And once these flying squirrels get in there, sometimes I've seen 5 or 6. I've heard of more even being in there, but sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 of them will huddle up in there as well. So if there's eggs in there, they will crush and eat the eggs. They can kill and eat the young. So that makes them, besides taking over a cavity, that can also be detrimental to the RCW population. So there's ways to take them out. The old-fashioned way was for me to climb up in a ladder. I think I may have a picture of one of my little traps here. Use some ether or starter fluid, squirt in there, make them come into my trap, and then take them off. A better way that I found some biologists in Arkansas were using was a backpack vacuum cleaner. And thanks to Heartwood Master Naturalists, yay, they bought this several years ago for me to use. It's a backpack vacuum cleaner. I do have to have a generator to run it. It's got an electrical cord that goes down to a generator. And it is actually a vacuum. And the idea is you climb up into the tree, you turn on the vacuum cleaner. I already know that there's squirrels in there. I saw the peeper scope, they were in there. So I climb up in the tree and stick my little hose there. I turn it on. And ideally the little squirrel gets sucked up and it's stuck on the side there with the suction. I pull it out with my lever leather gloves, and I've got a wire cage down here, right here, ready to put the squirrel into. I take the squirrel, I turn off the vacuum cleaner to turn off that suction that releases the squirrel, but he's in my hand, and I stuff him into this little can, and I keep going until I hopefully get all the other squirrels out of it. Not everybody does it this way. Some just dispose of the squirrels on site, and I can't do that. I know there's plenty of flying squirrels out there, but I just can't do that. So I take them and I relocate them to other places that are similar, but away from woodpeckers. And so this has been a lifesaver. My success rate with the old way of trying to get them with my trap or grabbers or anything like that was like not a very good percentage, kind of 50-50. And sometimes they'd get away and glide off. And sometimes they do get away here with the vacuum cleaner thing. But if I get up there quick enough and suck one out, something in the hole so the others can't get out and keep getting them out, then I can get them all out. There's also a YouTube video that shows this process. Their major predator, though, is the rat snake. It's a common snake around here. They're very good climbers. That's what makes them a problem with red cockaded woodpeckers, is they can climb trees. I've seen them on brick walls. The rough furrowed bark of pine trees is easy for them to get up into, but that's also part of the purpose of their sap layer, the resin wells that are flowing down. It protects them from the rat snake, because if they work every morning, if they work on these sap wells, keep them nice and flowing, fresh and sticky, and it doesn't dry up or anything like that, and it's facing the sun where it's nice and sticky. When the rat snake gets up to that sap layer, then it's going to gum up its belly scales, and it's going to back on off the tree or maybe even fall off the tree. So that keeps them out of their nest, because these snakes can sense when there's eggs or young in the nest, and they will get up there and they will eat the eggs or eat the young. So if I come up to a cavity and where I had eggs last week, but I come up and it's totally empty, there's not even eggshells in there, that tells me a rat snake got to it, because it's going to swallow those eggs and you won't see evidence of that sort of thing. So that's a protector against that major predator. One bad side of using live pine trees and having all that nice, fresh, wounded pine tree smell out there is their susceptibility to bark beetles. And this is an old photo of a southern pine beetle that attacked these cavity trees because they smell that resin, that the aroma that those trees put off. And they say, here's a tree we can attack and kill easily. So they did. They killed and attacked this. Thousands of beetles are going to attack a large pine tree like this. So this can be bad for them as well. This is a bark beetle, another bark beetle called the Ips engraver beetle. It's different. I can tell it's different from the southern pine beetle because the southern pine beetle has the little white popcorn looking pitch tubes on the side, we call them, looks like popcorn, but the Ips engraver beetles, they have some of their frass or the sawdust as they chew through there, that also gets mixed up in the pitch tube, and they're a darker color. So I knew it was an Ips engraver beetle that was in there. They will sometimes get in the tree and sometimes kill them. They don't always kill them as much as southern pine beetles will, but they will also kill them. A few times, I don't have a picture of the black turpentine beetle, but it is another one that will attack trees. But most of the time, most time from my experience, it does not kill the tree, but I have seen it kill a couple trees on one of our state forests, but it's another bark beetle. Another problem for red cockaded woodpeckers are windstorms. This is back from in the 2001. Anyway, there was straight line winds that came. I know they came through Lufkin, but they also went through the Sabine National Forest there on the boundary with Louisiana. And it wasn't a tornado, they said, but it was straight line winds that blew trees over. And you can see it didn't break them off. Yes, up in here, you can see where it probably broke them off at cavities, or even these trees are too narrow, thin to be cavity trees. They just snapped them off there, but it broke them off down here at the base. The green paint there shows you this was on a national forest, and it really blew those trees over. I heard a story about, after this storm came through and it destroyed a lot of red cockaded woodpecker cluster areas. And so a lot of the biologists got together and they climbed up in the tree, put in those artificial cavities I was talking about. And one guy said, I'd put in his last artificial cavity for the day, put the chainsaw in his truck, and here came a red cockaded woodpecker and flew right into that cavity. So you see how important those cavities are to them. And this is on our own Jones State Forest. This was after, I believe this was the first one, Hurricane Ike. And again, you can see where the artificial cavities were. In fact, it's sticking out right there. And that's where at least these two trees snapped over during the winds from Ike. And this one was split down at the base from Ike. And this is another one on another forest that had a storm and blown not totally over, but over enough, but it broke off the tree. So to keep this habitat like this, the nice open pine stand with not much mid-story, not much high growth in there, there's management that we have to do for that. Because if it gets like this, here's a stand where the yaupon and the small oaks and sweet gums and things are growing up. If that grows up so high that it gets close to the cavities, the entrance of the cavities, the woodpeckers are going to leave. The snakes can bypass their sap layer if there's a tree right next to the cavity, and they could climb up the oak tree and climb across a branch and still get into the nest if there's a tree right next to it. If this brush gets very high, they don't have a good clear flyway to fly through and get away from predators. So they're going to leave the area if this gets very high. So there's different ways that we do that. One way is the prescribed burn. This is an awesome way. It's a normal forestry practice. It is also good for the area because it's going to put, as we know, fire puts nutrients back into the soil. It's going to get rid of these, help get rid of, some things it just ticks off and they'll grow back. But if it gets these stems down low enough, that's good for a while to get this brush and things. It may not kill it, but it may get it down, get those stems down where it's not growing so tall and being a deterrent to the red cockaded woodpeckers. So they follow the same conditions, the optimum conditions for burning a prescribed burn on our state forest. Yes, you have the black look here. You still have the stems out there, but at least what's visible here is dead or dead here and is going not to grow up anymore. So you have a stand that looks like this. So let's help to get rid of that mid-story before it comes up, but it's a good, puts nutrients back into the soil, a good practice like that. But we know it doesn't take very long, unless it was a devastating hot fire like the Bastrop fire or something like that, that even singed soils and things, but greenery comes up pretty quickly. And this new fresh green sprouts, those are good browse for deer and other wildlife, rabbits. So any fresh succulent growth that comes back is good for wildlife. It's going to continue to grow into the flowering and fruit producing vegetation that we need, keeping that herbaceous layer on the ground where insects are going to breed and then later on crawl up into the trees and feed the woodpeckers and other birds. Another method for getting rid of the mid-story, and on the Jones State Forest, since we are very close to I-45, we're very close to houses. They're all on three sides of us. 3 sides of us are houses, very close. They were close to the airport. So yes, we can do prescribed burning. We have to do it in small blocks and do it just right, and to keep the smoke issues from being overwhelming to Farm Market 1488, I-45, or to the homes. So we still do the prescribed burning. We just have to do it in smaller blocks. Another method to do this, especially if the vegetation has gotten so high it's too dangerous to do a prescribed burn, is to use these mulching machines. They're kind of like glorified brush hogs, I call them. They have these teeth right here. You roll through it and it cuts down the vegetation, and you can go down as low as you want. You can just, or knock some of it down, or you can just keep grinding and grinding until you get like a golf course. And we don't necessarily want that, because we want the good herbaceous layer to still be there and for the insect larvae. And this one, we'll see if I can get I don't know if I can get the video to work. I don't know where I need to click. Maybe here. Okay, well, there's a video associated with a very short one, but I thought it would work here, but it's not. Anyway, these go through and knock down the brush. It knocks down all the stems, which is great, but you have to follow up the next year with herbicide or burning, because a lot of the things like the yaupon, the sweet gums, it just ticks them off and they come back even worse. So if you don't follow up with another activity like the burning or the herbicide, which we would do some of each, but mostly burning, but some of each, then it's just gonna come back worse. So this is a nice stand right here that got mulched. It still has the ground is still covered. It's not any bare soil or anything. You still have some herbaceous things that are coming up from that. And this is some before the mulch and after the mulch. And spraying herbicides in a situation where it was the understory is too high for actual mulching. So to get rid of some of the taller stems and some of that right there. Another method I use quite a bit are Boy Scouts. Eagle Scouts with a hatchet and their compadres and the Boy Scout troop really can get after it. So we have a lot of Eagle Scout groups that come up to the Jones State Forest for being so close to Houston, the Woodlands and Kingwood and all that sort of thing. So there's different troops that come up, and when an Eagle Scout candidate comes up and wants to do a project, they do other projects on our forest as well, but when they want to do a project with an endangered species, that's real easy for them to get through the approval stage. And they're helping us out a lot because there's no way we can do, for money wise and personnel wise, we can't do all the habitat work that we need to do out there. And the most important area to keep the mid-story down is close to our cavity trees. Yes, they need 75, 100, 125 acres or so. That needs to be nice and open like that. We can't always get that much done unless we have the mulchers available and working. But the area immediately around the cavity trees is the most important part because that's where they're going to be nesting. That's where they're going to be roosting. And Boy Scouts, of course, can't do 125 acres worth, but they can do a pretty good job in an area or in my cluster areas like this. So before Eagle Scouts came and during, they're out there working. They're great groups to work with. The parents are always well involved. They're nice young men. They're using their leadership skills. So they will do this work even in the summertime when it's really hot. And then the same group in the same place after, look what they've cleared away from my trees. And there's a cavity tree there. So it makes it easier for me to work in it, but it's much better for the red cockaded woodpeckers as well. Another awesome resource are Texas Master Naturalists. So back in 2014, we were moving birds from one forest to another, an unrelated forest. At that time, these birds were coming from Louisiana. And we had to have a few areas where the woodpeckers were not living at the time, but were suitable for woodpecker habitat to put in the artificial inserts and move these birds into. And back then we didn't even have the mulching machines, I don't think. And if they did, they were in West Texas. But anyway, we had to get some land clearing done. And these guys came up, I was July, I think it was actually August. It was really hot summer months. And I made them say, don't stay out there past noon. It's just too hot. But they would sign up and come out and work shifts with hand tools. And most of them were heartwood. I think I may have had a couple from Gulf Coast and maybe another chapter, but most of them were heartwood folks. And they would come in here with their hand tools, just like the scouts would, cut the brush that didn't need to be there and pull it to the side so it could decompose or be burned later on and clear out my area. So this is one of the cluster areas that we designated to move the birds into. So this was the before, and here's after that hand tool work. And so it's amazing what they did in a hot summertime. So I appreciate that very much. So they had a big hand in getting these birds moved to be able to be moved here. Now, when we do these management practices, whether it's the burning, the clearing of the brush, and anything managing to keep those stands nice and open like that and have a good herbaceous layer, it's not just for the red cockaded woodpecker. It's healthy forest management anyway. It's helping to cut back on competition from the plants that we do want there and the trees, but it also helps provide habitat for other rare species. So the popular bobwhite quail will like, at certain life stages, will like that type of habitat, the nice open pine stands. We don't have them, I haven't heard them at the Jones State Forest, but in other areas, you'll hear them in red cockaded woodpecker stands. And the rare Bachman sparrow, or Bachman sparrow, some pronounce it, but the state ornithologist Cliff Shackelford has met the family and they pronounce their family name Bachman. So I'm trying to say Bachman sparrow. Another rare bird likes the same type of habitat. In fact, I've been in woodpecker clusters, not on the Jones, but other places, private lands where they had Bachman sparrow there. Also, the most rare snake in Texas and probably the most rarest in the US, the Louisiana pine snake, was a candidate species for listing for many years, and this past year was listed as threatened. So it is a threatened species. It likes the same type of habitat, nice open stands like that. Another rare plant, the Texas trailing phlox. It's federally and state listed as endangered, and it's only known from the longleaf pine region of Hardin, Polk, and Tyler counties. So that's the only place it's occurring naturally. Now, the gardens in Nacogdoches at SFA have a stand of them, I believe, but where they occur naturally, just Hardin, Polk, and Tyler counties. So what are we doing to recover the red cockaded woodpecker? Whenever there is an endangered species, there's also a recovery plan that comes with it for what federal and other entities need to do to recover the species, get it back up to numbers that are suitable, that are where they're more likely to survive and maybe even be downlisted. And I haven't thought, Carolyn, on thinking about my time. If I need to be interrupted for a minute, let me know, or some other reason, just let me know, okay? So what are we doing for, we're good? Okay.
Doing good.
Okay, good, thanks. So recovering for the red cockaded woodpecker, the federal, the national forests, the feds are mandated to recover the species, but there's other populations around like state lands and some private lands and industry lands that also can participate in this to help the population to grow. So we've been part of the Translocation Cooperative, the West Gulf Coast Translocation Cooperative for many years. We had several years ago when I first started, we moved one bird or two to another, one of the national forests off of our state forest, but we have twice, and hopefully again will this year, moved woodpeckers from another unrelated population to our population. So this translocation is used all across the South and the East Coast where the woodpeckers occur. They have different cooperatives where they get together and they take birds that from one population and help to help other populations that are small or need to have a mate brought in for another bird. So we've been part of that. We are a small population. In Texas, the population that is more designated as a donor population to donate to other sites here in Texas is the Sam Houston National Forest. They are the largest forest here in East Texas that has most of the woodpeckers here. And they are a donor population. So we can't take just any woodpecker. We have to take a woodpecker that is an extra bird. That means it's not an adult. They found that juveniles move better and stick better where you place them than adults do. And so they'll take a juvenile that is not needed as a helper bird with a family group. So it's either an extra male and any female can go because she doesn't usually stay behind as a helper bird anyway. So a female or an extra male, if they already have a helper bird, can be taken from one place and moved to another. So that's the little cage that it was brought into. So that's the translocation, moving populations from one area to another one to help beef up the gene pool and enhance the numbers of woodpeckers. So first we have to capture the juvenile birds that were moving from one location to another. This is how we do it. These are aluminum poles that are stacked one on top of each other. On the top of it is a mist net. It's a wire frame that has the fine threaded mist net in it, like you would catch bats or other small birds down on the ground. And you wait till they come in to roost. They roost. They're the first ones to go to bed too. So they go to bed kind of early, just before dusk. And they're in there to roost. We let them stay in there several minutes to kind of settle down. Then we go up there with this pole and plop that pole, stack it up as high as we need to get to the cavity and plop that mist net across the whole of the cavity. And then somebody else on the ground takes a pole or a limb and wails away at the tree. Ideally, the bird flies out, is startled, he flies out and gets caught up in the mist net. And then we lower the poles, bring down the mist net and take the bird out. So sometimes they're pretty tangled, and even if it's a little bit tangled, they're hollering. It's nighttime, so it's quiet in the forest. He says, well, they're squawking, bloody murder there in the forest. You can see of course, they've got strong neck muscles and they're picking away at knuckles and drawing blood. And so we take them out and then place them into a cage like you saw the one before. Sometimes if the night goes on, it gets later, just like us, the longer we're in bed, the harder it is to roust us out. So sometimes when you put the mist up there and knock on the tree, they're not flying out. So I've had to climb up in a tree 30 feet, others have done it more, 30 feet, and take a little piece of straw or something and poke down in there to make the bird flush out and come into the mist net. So trying to get them out sometimes is a problem. But once we get them out, we put them in a cage. It is labeled with pertinent information, what bands are on their legs, the colors, and the band number, where it came from, what their cluster number was, and whether it's artificial or natural tree, is it male or female, and it gets taken off to where it's supposed to go. In our case, in 2014, when we translocated birds, the Sam Houston at that time was offline as far as a donor because of budget constraints, budget cuts, and things like that. They couldn't do the monitoring that is necessary ahead of time to know where these birds are and how many can be spared and that sort of thing. So our first birds came from Louisiana. So I say we have some Cajun birds out there on our state forest now. So they came from Louisiana. So I had to meet at the state line at dark and pick up the birds that were designated to come to our property and bring them to the Louisiana, to the Fairchild, the Jones State Forest. Another group of guys picked up some for me on the Fairchild. I couldn't be at both forests at the same night. They did all the capturing on the same night. And I also had a broken hand. You may have noticed in the other photo, said, oh man, the biggest night of my career and I can't do it. But another biologist that's a private consultant, it does environmental consulting, did it. And that was a lifesaver for me. So he was very gracious. So it took me a while to get back from the Louisiana border and bring the birds. So at 2:30, 3 a.m., he's up in the tree, climbing up in the tree. So what we've done ahead of time, we have the artificial cavities were put in, and the new artificial cavities we covered with a piece of wire, piece of mesh. So nothing else could come in there, dirty it up, mess it up. So when we come out translocation night to put a bird in, we know it's nice and clean. Nobody else is living in there, and we can just climb up there and plop the bird in. So he's taken the bird out of the cage, and he's taken the wire mesh off the front, plopped it in there, and on that mesh, before we leave, we have a string tied to that wire mesh, and the string leads all the way to the ground. It's lightly tacked in enough to where the bird can't get out, because after all of that, if we just put it in there without covering it up, they would be freaked out, they'd fly out, they'd probably get eaten by an owl or something, and all is for naught. So they're covered in there overnight to settle down. So the next morning, we're out there early, and we wait for the birds to tell us it's time to come out. They may peck on the screen right here. If we've augmented a bird, a cluster, that means there's one living there, a male, an unmated male or something, and we brought a female in. If he comes out on his own, flying around, does his normal thing, then we pop this off. So we have the string down here. Someone on the ground is holding the string. And on the days that those nights we put a pair in, so we had a female in one area and a male in the other area. So I had people stationed at different places holding these strings because we wanted to pop them off at the same time so the birds meet in the air, fall in love, and maybe stay and have a family. May or may not happen. Sometimes they stick where you put them, and sometimes they find their own place on the forest, and that's what happened with these birds. But here's a neat series of photos right here where the young girl, Dad brought her in, and I had someone else on another tree. And when I said pull, they pulled on the strings and the bird is flying out. This is a neat series of photos by this girl's dad, took these awesome photos. So that was 2014. And I could account for, by help with birders and from what I saw, I could account for 3 of the 4 birds. We moved 2 pairs. Neither pair stuck where we put them, but they did find a place in the population elsewhere on the forest. And so by looking at band colors and everything, I could account for 3 of the 4 birds. So I don't know, the 4th one may have been out there and we just wasn't seen or wasn't identified, but could account for 3 of the 4 birds. Well, 4 years later, we were back in the rotation in 2018 to get birds again. This time I didn't have a broken arm, so I could do it myself. And these birds were able to come from the Sam Houston, so it's much closer. And in fact, the biologists who collected those birds, they helped us out by actually bringing the birds to us. And he coached me through this, putting the birds in the cavity myself. When we had the artificial cavities put in, if the mid-story is nice and low, if we've got a good open stand. They just put them in at about 22 feet now. So this was easy. Normally when I ban the birds, it's like 30, 40, 50 feet sometimes. This is 20 feet. I climb up there, take the screen off, put the bird in. I had a crew down here taking notes. She was taking notes of where we put the bird, what tree number, what in this tree, which bird was it? That label that was on the box, we tacked to the tree, as well as these notes saying which bird got put in which tree and which cluster. Again, the next morning we had the strings, come out and pull the strings off. This, it didn't have as fancy of a camera. So here you see, there's my bird coming out real quick right there. So I didn't have the time-lapse photography like the other guy did. So we'll look at the current status of the red cockaded woodpecker in Texas. The latest data I have is 2019. I don't have everybody's 2020 data, but I have it through 2019. These are the national forests. So the Sabine National Forest is here on the bottom, Angelina National Forest, Davy Crockett, and then the Sam Houston has the most birds. So these are the numbers of groups. And by groups, we mean the family group. There could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 birds in a group. But this is the number of groups. And you can see here, in the 90s, they started increasing after they started using those artificial cavities. And everybody's increasing some, a little dip here, 2008, 2009 on the Sabine, but slowly, steadily increasing. Sam Houston increasing more. But they also have a larger population. They also have a larger gene pool to have, so you're having better breeding and that sort of thing. So they have a larger population. The larger population is going to grow more faster. And these other forests as well, at times had birds translocated from the national forest, the other national forest, to them as well to help their population numbers. Well, as I mentioned, the red cockaded woodpecker is listed as endangered, but every 5 years, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does a review of a certain listed species. So they conduct these assessments of the listed species just to see how the populations are doing. And they utilize the best available science. They contact all the people involved with it. Like for us, how many over the several years, how have your populations done? How many birds do you have there now? How much acreage is managed for them and that sort of thing. So using the best available science and the data, they determine whether the status has changed. Their status should be changed since the time it was listed. Red cockaded woodpeckers have been listed as endangered since 1970. Endangered Species Act, as we know it, came along in 73, so they continued that protection. So this past 5-year review included several species, but one of them was the red cockaded woodpecker. And after the 5-year review, or the 5-year reviews, and they get all the data from all the managers and things like that, there's 4 possible outcomes of that. They could be reclassified from threatened to endangered, which is uplisting. If it looks like their populations are still going low or crashing or whatever, they need more protections, so they put them as endangered. Or they could reclassify it from endangered to down to threatened, still protected, but a little different type of protection that's called down listing. Or they can be removed totally from the list, like the bald eagles, they're delisted, or they just maintain the same. So keep no change, keeping the current classification. They publish, once they are doing these reviews, they publish notice of the reviews of each individual species in the Federal Register, requesting information on the status from others. They review all that information and publish it in the Federal Register again, which is open to the public and for comment and peer review, but they've already had they go by the scientific information that they have. Anyway, the peers, the public can review it or can give their opinions and things like that, but they're going by what they get in the scientific data that they get there. After a period of 60 days, they make a final determination, is made and published. If somebody has some new data that they want to include, they can do that then. But after 60 days, then they make a final determination. Have not heard that yet for the red cockaded woodpecker, but this just shows some of the species that we would have in that came through this last review. And the Texas species I listed in red. So the gray wolf, they're proposing to list it from endangered to delisting. That's because there's no more gray wolves in Texas. So that would be here for the state of Texas. Red cockaded woodpecker, they are listed as endangered, but they are proposing to reclassify it to threatened. It would still be protected in certain ways. It would still be, there's maybe less protections, but there still are protections. They asked each of the managers on the forest what they would do if it was downlisted or delisted. And all of them that I know of, and I know with the Texas Forest Service on our two populations, we said we're just going to manage the same, just as they were with endangered. So there's different things that you can and can't do with endangered and threatened species. So it's still a protection, but just a different type of protection. The least turn, which could occur here in Texas, and they're proposing to delist, that totally take that off the list. That means it's not in trouble anymore. So where can you see red cockaded woodpeckers in East Texas? All four of our national forests have populations of the red cockaded woodpeckers on them. Sam Houston has the most. There's one easy to get to viewing area on FM 1375 near New Waverly, and on FM 2025 east side of the forest. I know this one, 1375, still still has woodpeckers living on it. It's a good place to go. I'm not sure about this one, but somebody told me recently, yes, you can still go see the woodpeckers there as well. This is that forest contact information there if you wanted to go see them. Of course, on our W.G. Jones State Forest, we can see them here. I put this in for people who don't realize where we are and where we live with this state forest here. You can see right down there and all the urbanization around it. See that sort of thing. A little up close right here on our wooded area, kind of a little island. And another reason that we need to bring in woodpeckers from other populations is there's less and less travel corridors for the woodpeckers coming from the national forest or from private lands to get to our forest. So with less forested areas there for them to safely travel, then we need an artificial way to enhance our gene pool, and that would be bringing in the other woodpeckers. And on the state forest, Connor's alluded to this before, we get a lot of traffic. We get a lot of birders, a lot of photographers, horseback riders, hikers, usually live right there around the forest. But when I first started working with the woodpecker and going to the Jones, they would say, oh, we have people that fly into Intercontinental Airport. They rent a car, come up here, look for the endangered red cockaded woodpecker, check it off their list, and go back to the airport and go off, fly other places. I said, no, that's exaggeration. You're just kidding. No, it's true. I have run into people from England, from Germany, China, Japan. Some have been there from Sweden, that sort of thing. And that's what they're there. They're doing there to find their endangered species or other rare species that they don't see and check them off their list. So it's a pretty popular place. We have a lot of visitors there. So during nesting season, we do have signs up where we have the woodpeckers up. We put this up. We even had to, we block off with gates certain areas on the Jones State Forest to keep traffic out of there. We know they're nesting. Birders can still come, and from a distance with spotting scopes, they can still see and hear the birds, but that just keeps traffic from going right by the cavity trees during this critical time during the nesting period. We've even had to put a statement prohibited use of remote control devices such as drones and aircraft there, because people were coming out there trying to fly drones around while we've got woodpeckers out there. The other state forest, the only other state forest that we have with population of red cockaded woodpeckers is the ID Fairchild State Forest. That's on Highway 84 between Rusk and Palestine. And that is on the Prairies and Piney Woods East Wildlife Trail. So this is kind of where that trail is, and the green arrow pointed out where the Fairchild State Forest is. It's not as built up around itself as the Jones is. There is a lot of farmland and pastures, but there's also other wooded areas around here as well. But we're more removed from other populations. So it is actually an island there, and don't get a lot of influx of other birds, although we have in the past. So there's our Fairchild State Forest. All four of our national forests, Sabine, Angelina, Davy Crockett, and on the Angelina National Forest, a neat place to go see them if you're down this direction is at Boykin Springs area, the road that goes down to Boykin Springs before you get to Old Aldridge. It's a nice, beautiful longleaf stand, and they've got red cockaded woodpeckers there not too far off the road. I take people there sometimes when they're in the area, teachers and things like that, and take them to see pitcher plants and things like that. So there's the road that you go to, here's a split, a little Y right here. And this way goes to Boykin Springs, the recreation area where you can have camping. And this goes to Old Aldridge, neat old sawmill ruins there. But this, if you take this fork, like going to Boykin Springs area, that goes into the recreation area, but the woodpeckers I'm talking about are kind of right in here. And I can give you more details if you need. Yeah, right in there is an active cluster of red-cockaded woodpeckers. Sam Houston National Forest, again, not too far from where y'all are, so you know where to go there. But how can we help as Texas master naturalists? Several years ago, y'all had a great program. It's called A Home in the Forest, and putting in these artificial cavities does cost money. We have a contractor that puts them in, and so they raised money, and we were able to put in several artificial cavities through that program. It takes about $150 for each artificial cavity. The cavity itself doesn't cost that much, but the putting it in does. And so John Warner, if you knew John Warner before he left, he's a big showman, and he really brings in a lot of good press and a lot of good activities. So the day they were going to put in artificial cavities, we had some of the master naturalists that donated come here, and they had their cavities out there, and then the guys the contractors came to put in the artificial cavities. And so it was really neat to see that sort of thing. Another thing that is very helpful to me, if you're a birder and get out there and have good binoculars and spotting scopes and stuff, if you see any of the woodpeckers, whether it's nesting season or not, but it's a red-cockaded woodpecker, if you can see or get a photo and look at any of the leg bands, it really helps me out to know who's who and where they are. You can see the little leg bands on the leg of this one. Sometimes they're very difficult to see, but most birders have better binoculars and better eyes and spotting scopes than I have. This is a blown up picture, so it's hard to see, but somebody sent me this picture and I could tell exactly which bird it was. And that's how I found out where my Louisiana birds were, by somebody's photo, and showed me that. Now this one has a lot of sap on those leg bands, so it's sometimes hard to tell the color, but if you can kind of guess the color and what leg it was on, that helps me out as well. So just seeing and if it's an unbanded bird, there's going to be some unbanded ones out there. I haven't been able to catch every nestling out there. There's going to be some unbanded ones out there. If I find a color combination that I don't have, then I can check with someone from the Sam Houston to see if it's one of their birds or whatever. Also, if you find a new cavity tree that's not barked either with the flagging or the green paint, sometimes I'll find trees and they don't get green painted until we have a project or something going on. If you find a tree that looks similar to this with a round hole, it may or may not be finished. It has a little sap. It's not rough and jaggedy like a pileated woodpecker would do, but kind of round like that, and it doesn't have any marking like a piece of flagging or something around it. Let me know where that is. Take a GPS point if you can, or mark it somehow and let me know where that is. This again is an active, it's probably hadn't been built for very long, but it's an active tree because they're already pecking away the bark away and showing the red under the bark and fresh sap. So, but it's not a lot of sap because it looks like it's a new tree to me. So if you find something like that, you don't even have to tell if it's active or inactive. If you find something that's not marked, you say, hey, this might be a red-cockaded woodpecker tree, let me know that. That helps a whole lot. So these are different views of that. And from a distance, this is an inactive tree. This is one of the artificial cavities that was put in that never was used. They still have the paint on it to simulate the sap on it, but this is one of the trees starting to grow around it. So this is one that never was used. And these trees are, the sap is, there's a lot of sap. It was used quite a bit in the past, but it's not fresh and sticky looking. It's not runny. Some of it is gray. Some of it is this dingy, but not shiny yellow. So this is inactive. There's not a lot of new activity out there on that one. And these are things that could be confused. Like this is a start hole where they started building. Looks like maybe in a knot hole, but it's not finished. This is an abandoned cavity. The sap is gray, but they used it at one time. There's sap on it, and it's a nice, good round hole. This is an abandoned cavity also. The hole's not quite as rounded out, but it's an old one. They over the years, after they pick away the bark, they picked away more bark. There's wood showing. That's called a plate, which is actually good, keeps sap out of here. But again, the old gray sap is not new. This is enlarged by another woodpecker, so it's not being used. It's not active. This has been enlarged by probably a pileated to get it big enough for him to go inside. So those are often confused for red-cockaded woodpecker cavity trees, or even or for active trees, but those are abandoned trees. And these are the ones that are confused. These are confused. Yellow-bellied sapsucker, the little holes that go around the tree like this. This is asymmetrical feeding hole of a pileated woodpecker. It's asymmetrical. It's not the round, nice, smooth, conical one. It's more rectangular or triangular or something like that. This one is also a wound of some sort from the tree, no form at all to it. It's not even picked through. So something, a falling branch or something, or falling tree wounded that tree. And that's just a branch hole. It looks like a hole. Some woodpeckers will get in there and start their cavity in that little branch hole, but this is just a broken off branch and no icicle, no sap flowing down. So that's just a natural branch. So hopefully with all the monitoring that we do and the habitat work that we do and moving woodpeckers and getting good genetics out there, we can help this bird to continue to grow and thrive in numbers. And that's the end. So I wasn't able to, I didn't pull up the chat on this while I was doing this. Let me stop sharing.
Yes.
So I was able to keep up with questions along the way. And I just saw something about golden cheek warbler. Golden cheek warbler was actually taken off the list in 2018. So pretty, before I keep saying that, let me make sure I'm golden cheek warbler, and then there's the other one that's near it. But the golden cheek warbler, I'm pretty sure the one that was downlisted. And and that is in Central Texas. Let me get to a better page so I can better answer your question.
So while you're looking that up, Donna, I have a question from one of our interns. He wanted to know if it's possible to see them in our backyards here in the woodlands. How far away from the forest do they fly looking for food?
They could go out a quarter mile, sometimes half a mile, but in your backyard is pretty rare. Since where we are, there's enough forested area around them for them to use. If you were right up next to the forest, that is possible if it's nice and open. They're not going to come to your bird feeder because they don't feed on the seeds like that. But if you have a large pine tree that's out in the open, or even other oak trees or things that are kind of out in the open, they could come over there and forage looking for food. It would be rare to have a cavity tree away from the forest very far, especially if it's kind of a dense area. I drove through an area in Conroe that someone was worried about before and looked through their neighborhood, and yeah, there's mature pine trees there, but it's still very dense. Now they'll come. They usually don't like active areas, but ours are kind of get used to that with all the building around them. And some are in other places on golf courses and things like that. But it'd be rare for one to be in your backyard, but it's possible. If you get a picture and can send to me, or if you're wondering about a tree, I can either send me a picture or I can come look at it next time I'm there, and I'd be glad to look at it. But it'd be kind of rare, especially if you're over more than half a mile from the forest. And the golden cheek warbler, it's been listed since 1990, but it was downlisted in 2018, I believe. This one isn't showing me that. Let's see. Oh, wait. No. See, I'm maybe getting mixed up here. Oh yeah, black-capped vireo is the one that is still listed. Oh no, I'm backwards. Sorry, I do that all the time. Okay, black-capped endangered species is the golden cheek warbler. It is still listed as endangered, and it's going to be in Central Texas. They do migrate, so they're usually in Mexico and Central America. They do come to Central Texas. I don't have anything that tells me canopies, but it's going to be the woodlands that have the ash juniper in it. And it is the black-capped vireo. I got to get that straight in my head, Donna. I'm sorry. Black-capped vireo that was downlisted in 2018. So it was totally delisted where it was listed before. Same thing. They're in the Central Texas, mainly rangelands and clumps of shrub trees and things like that. The black-capped vireo. But golden cheek warbler is dependent on those juniper woodlands.
So one of our questions is, do the trees that have natural cavities have the same weakness in high winds that the artificial cavities have?
They do, because I have seen natural cavities. They don't cut as big of a hole as the the artificial cavity is a little bit larger hole, as you can see, to put in the cavity. It's not as large of a hole, but I have seen them in high winds to do snap off. And especially if it's an old one that the woodpeckers aren't using anymore and other woodpeckers have enlarged the outside and the inside, they will snap off there. It takes pretty high winds to do that, but it is possible.
And the heartwood has already gone through some weakness, and that's what makes
Correct. Yeah. That's what makes it conducive to them building in there. The red heart rot itself doesn't kill the tree. It just softens that heartwood, and these woodpeckers take advantage of that. So yeah, you're right. It already has that weakness in the center of it.
And that's where we get our heartwood name from, is from that
Right.
from the red cockaded woodpeckers.
Right. And y'all have strong hearts.
Someone wanted to know, when do the ICWs lay their eggs?
Okay. They lay their eggs usually April. Now down there on the Jones, I used to could just buy the calendar, say April 12th, they're going to start laying down there. This year, everything was a week or two late. And I'm guessing maybe it's because of the late cold snaps, but usually middle of April, they're starting to lay eggs. They may start exhibiting nesting behavior before that. Official season is like middle of March to middle of July, but usually around here, not laying eggs until middle of April. I've had some hatch last week, and the week before I banded, today's Saturday, okay, Thursday, I banded some on the Jones on Thursday. I had a little window of no rainstorm that I could go in there and band some there. So I've got a 10-year-old chick down there now that's banded, and another one that didn't get banded because of weather conditions. And that is probably about almost 17 or 18 days old.
Wow.
And so they start laying then and hatching, and May is all through May could be nesting season. They can nest then. If they lose a clutch of eggs to a predator, they may re-nest. But if it's really late, like if they ended up laying eggs in June, by the time they hatch, it's so warm out there, a lot of times you don't even get the eggs to hatch. So they're not always viable if they're that late in re-nesting. But they will re-nest if they lose a clutch of eggs. They'll only lay one nest during the year unless they lose one. So, and somebody asked for contact information. I'm typing it in now.
Good. Someone wants to know if she sees them on her property. I think it's Denise, and Denise has a lot of property that's further out west. She wants to know if she needs to notify anyone particular, or do y'all check iNaturalist to see what's
I don't check iNaturalist normally to see where they're finding them or things like that. Feel free to call me, and I can come check and make sure. I can tell you what you need to do and can and can't do. I'm not a policing agency, so I don't turn you in or shut down your operation or anything like that. But I can tell you what you can and can't do with that bird there. If you own property near a national forest or our state forest in the area of red cockaded woodpeckers, there's a program called Safe Harbor. And Fish and Wildlife Service years ago gave Texas A&M Forest Service and Texas Parks and Wildlife a joint permit to bring other people under their permit for possible what they call incidental take. If you're doing natural, normal, legal activities and it ends up taking a bird, then you can have protections with that. But basically, I go out and I survey the property looking for signs of woodpeckers. If there's none there, you sign up with the program, you have a baseline of 0. No birds were here. You can do whatever you want to with it. If I go out there and find, okay, you have one family group right over here, and it would benefit you to sign up with the program because you have more flexibility than you would just under the Endangered Species Act. And if you have one group here, and okay, you sign up, you have a baseline of 1. So you just have to make sure that one group has enough habitat. You don't have to go through the intense management that we do on the state and national forests, but you also can't take their habitat away. And then if you're under the Safe Harbor program, you can you have flexibility in the future. Say, well, I have some new birds. I'm managing my property nice. It's nice and open. Some new birds came in. I have a baseline of 1, but I have a second group that came on. If it's biologically permitted, if it's biologically acceptable, you can switch what you're responsible for from that one group. I'm moving my hands. I don't know if people can even see me. One group to the new group, if the biologists agree, and then you can do whatever you want to with that acreage, but still and move your responsibility for saving keeping the habitat behind to the other group. So how many acres are considered adequate for a family? From research, a good viable family needs at least 75 acres of good habitat. That means it's all open, it's all mature pine forest, not too dense. But if there's an area of sparse acreage that doesn't have enough pine trees, there's a certain amount of pine trees you have to have out there, then it may need to go to 100 or 125 feet. So we do a survey, and that's just for maintaining that one group. If you want to grow birds, each family group needs more, 125, 150 acres or more for them to grow and flourish. But for maintaining one individual group, they've come up with 75 acres is sufficient if it's good quality. If it's not good enough quality, you just add on acreage to get that total basal area of mature pine footage, pine acreage.
The birds that you are aware of are mostly on the state and national forest. And what about private lands? Do you get a lot of information about that?
Yeah, I do know some of the private lands. I can't disclose anything, but most people in the woodpecker world or around there know who has them. But there are some private lands that have them, and there are some private lands now that that used to be timber company lands and then became investment company lands, and now they're in the hands of private people who want to keep them and manage for them. So that's good. Yeah. So the people I know that have them want them and are excited about them, and they get grants and things to help manage for them. So there are private lands that have them, and some are that have a lot of acreage and have these grants and can come in and do the management for them and all these special things for them. They're just flourishing. So. And then there are still some of the investment companies, like what Connor mentioned. There used to be company lands like International Paper and used to be Champion and Timberland and all that. A lot of them divested themselves of their land, so these investment companies came in and bought them. And so there's a few of those that have woodpeckers, but they're doing the right thing and they're managing for those woodpeckers as well.
Awesome. I know that there are some up at Sam Houston's their Piney Woods Environmental Research Laboratory. There's some up there. It used to be just their biological laboratory, something like that.
Cool. Okay.
And so Alan Byboth up there had told me that he's got red cockaded woodpecker.
Oh, good. Okay.
And
now, how close is that to Huntsville? What direction is that?
Well, do you know where the body farm is?
Yeah, the old fish hatchery.
Right.
That's
exactly where he is. He's at the old fish hatchery.
Well, there used to be some there, but I didn't know there was some.
He says there still are.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I didn't know that, because there's one of the Parks and Wildlife folks took me to the area where they used to. In fact, I abandoned birds there when they had them. But he took me to a place where we looked at where the old trees were, and it's just all dense and not usable by RCWs. But I didn't know some more were still out there. So that's good to know. Yeah, I didn't have any idea.
He has some of the biology students come out and help clear out the undergrowth.
Oh, good. Okay.
So yeah. So
good. Yeah, I know exactly where that is. It's just not in the same location where they used to be. So cool. That's good to know. Yay.
Yay. So yeah, Alan Byboth is the one who's in charge over there, and he could probably tell you more about what's available out there. But yeah, I was very excited when he said, we've got some over here, and I thought, breeding populations,
cool.
Genetics and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So, and they may get some influx from Sam Houston as well. Some birds moving back and forth. So
awesome. Let's see if there are any other lots of. No, I think we hit most of it. So during the breeding season, when they're actually sitting on clutches, I think they close off part of the trails.
We do. Yeah, we put out just to keep so much traffic, because those would be joggers and people with dogs and things like that. And John said, well, our population is so low, we want to give them every chance we can. So they do put off the little trail markers that block them off. I mean, some people go around, but at least it slows down the traffic around there. Maybe there's less disturbance for the nesting woodpeckers. And he'll take those down probably, Connor will take those down probably middle of June.
Awesome. I'm
scanning through questions now.
Good. Oh, good. Somebody wants to know. Oh, that was a question I wanted to ask you.
Don Taylor. I'm class of 79. Whoop. Okay. I just saw class of 78.
Yeah. Early on, we had a good whoop. You had mentioned that Heartwood had bought nesting cavities before.
Right.
Is there a push for that right now, Donna?
We have if somebody wants to, I mean, we've got a fund that we've gotten donations, other donations from other entities as well. So there is a fund that will buy us some more of those cavities, and we'll need to put in 8 more for if we're in line to have translocation again this year, if the populations ahead of us get what they need. So I don't know what's going to happen because Louisiana lost some birds, I'm afraid. But if we get to do it this year or next year, we'll have to have artificial cavities put in. So we do have a fund that we have some in, maybe not quite enough to get a total of 8 of them, but if that's a project somebody wanted to do, you can get with Connor Murnane on the forest, and he'll know about the account that's set aside just, so it can't be used for anything else, but just for red cockaded woodpecker artificial cavities. And that does help us a lot. So.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that. Oh, somebody wanted to know if they could put a cavity in their backyard, but outside of the tree.
You would probably get like a tufted titmouse or chickadees or flying squirrels or other things to inside the tree because they use the red cockadeds use that sap for so much, and that's just their instinct to make that sap flow and everything. So I don't know if they would come in one that's outside the tree or not. That's possible, but you'd get other cool things. But yeah. I see somebody says, does anybody know why the red spot moves to show female sexual maturity? I don't know, but that may be a good reason. Now, I don't know why that starts off there anyway, but see, I never thought of that. Jamie, I just learned, I had an enlightenment from you. I don't know if that's why, but that makes sense to me. So, so I'm going to see if anybody else knows that. I've never had anybody tell me that, but that makes sense. So that's pretty cool. Because most things, I mean, yeah, when they have different feathers when they molt, but it looks totally different. It's males and females, but this one, in the situation of a male, have a spot somewhere and then somewhere else other times. That's cool. I don't know, Jamie.
You can tell who's the helper bird as opposed to a female, because the helper bird would still have the red here, or does the helper bird have here?
No, the helper bird, all of them, all the males would, once they have their first molt in September, October, and get in their new feathers, all males would have the red back here. So it's not like ants or bees or anything where they have different classes. Yes. But the helper birds are usually males just because the females are out of there if there's not a breeding spot for her. So it's rare to have a female helper bird. It's probably happened somewhere, but usually they will disperse about September, October, usually about December. That's why we start trying to capture birds before December. We usually do it in October to move from one place to another before the females disperse. So they're December, January, they're going to be dispersing somewhere else to maybe find an unmated male somewhere else. But all the males are going to look the same. We just call them helper bird because they're staying behind. They're staying behind at home to actually do some work. But if there's like 2 or 3 helper birds, they can afford to lose one of the juveniles to move somewhere else and be top breeder somewhere else.
So Vala wants to know if there are instructions for making the artificial cavities.
I don't know if there's instructions online. Probably in my files, I have the specs for that. And I'm sure it's okay to use homemade ones. The contractor who puts it in for us, they have a resource somewhere that gets them. I don't think he makes them, but I'm sure I've got specs somewhere. So
what are you thinking, Vala, that would be a project would be for us to build some of these to help? Instead of paying $150 to buy them, we could make some.
I'm writing myself a note to check on that. Yes. And of course, there's certain specs as far as depth. If you have the hole saw that can dig in this way, the specs on the entrance of the hole, and the PVC pipe is okay. That helps keep the others from enlarging. That makes it kind of tight sometimes for me to work in, but so you might have to make the hole bigger. So I'll find newer specs than what they have, because I'm sure it has to follow certain specs, but I don't think there's any requirement for it to be built by a certified birdhouse builder. So let me check on that and get back with you, because I've had others ask that before, but I know it does have to follow certain specs for the birds themselves, but it should be simple if you have the right tools. Cedar, because that doesn't rot as quickly, and then just the plywood top to cover up the hole that you drilled in. So
That's
Okay, I'll
great.
check on that and get back with you.
That's so cool. Yeah, Bala said that he'd like to do it for us and for himself.
Well, good. I see someone asked about how high on average off the ground are the cavities built. Well, when we put in the artificial ones, I mentioned like if the habitat's real good, 22 feet. If we can't get the habitat down as well, sometimes 30, 33, 32, 33 feet, they'll put them in. The birds themselves will build it 35, I would say on average 40 feet, 35 to 40 feet, because that's what I'm seeing nowadays. If the mid-story is coming up, the higher the mid-story is, the higher they're going to build. So I've seen them at 60. I've heard of them at 70 feet. So, but average 35 to 40 feet. I have some at 42, 47. So I would say 40 is a good average for the natural ones that the woodpeckers build.
So you climb up that high.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
if we had time for the video, you would get to see a little bit of that, but I can send you the links to, I'll just copy here. I can,
awesome.
I'm going to, I've got a file up here where I've got links.
Oh, good.
I'm going to copy, and then you can do whatever with them. See if this works.
I can add those.
I don't know if it'll let me, I don't know if it'll let me copy into the chat.
Oh yeah.
If it'll let me paste.
There you go.
Okay. And if you know Ken Cram, some of y'all have been around a while may know Ken Cram. He's a amazing naturalist and a photographer and videographer, and he's always doing videos. So he's the one who did these. If these links are most of them, yeah, I guess he did all of them actually. If they don't work, you can go to YouTube, find Ken Cram's channel, or put in red cockaded woodpecker banding or translocation on the Jones State Forest, and you'll see several there, but these are 3 special ones that have need information on them. So if they don't work for you, let me know and I can just send you that in another format.
Awesome.
They may work just like that. Cool.
Oh yes, I remember seeing these because I was actually in the picture you showed from 2014. So it was 2014 when I.
Oh, okay. You were with that group right there, right?
Yes,
yeah.
I was in that group, and so I remember seeing a lot of these that Ken had done, and I think that's when we talked about the vacuum cleaner and sucking the flying squirrels out. I think that was terrible. It reminds me of people sucking out prairie dogs.
Oh yeah. Well, see, I told you, ideally, when I put it in there, the squirrel gets stuck on the side, and that's what happens most of the time. But every great once in a while, if they turn their head just wrong or right, it goes down the tube and into my compartment. And the first time in that vacuum cleaner video, you may not notice it if you don't know to look for it, but I'll just kind of like this, because I thought, oh, I told them I wouldn't hurt squirrels when I'm doing this. And there's no blades. It's not like a Vegematic. There's no blades in there. It just goes to the bottom of the canister, and he's real ticked off, kind of dazed and stunned. But they're not harmed in that. I do put them in the cage and relocate them to another forest. So
that's so good. That's always good. Yes, I'm glad to hear that. That is so awesome. Do we have any other final questions for Donna? Y'all can drop them in the chat right now, or you can unmute if you like. I have a few more people I'd like to introduce to us. What I've been doing, Donna, since we don't get to meet in person, is letting people kind of introduce themselves in the chat. A few people each time, just so we get to know each other. And then when we're out volunteering and we see somebody, we can kind of know, who our cohorts are, and it makes it good to get out there and volunteer. So I can't wait. Do you have a date that you'll be coming back to the forest that you'll need help?
I don't know for sure yet. Of course, I'm having to watch the weather, but yeah, that's another thing. If you're interested in helping, I gave my email address plus my desk phone number here. Yeah. Anybody can contact me. I can put you on an email. I have a long list for the Jones and a short list for the Fairchild, because it's so far removed from where y'all are. But I have a long gist that I'll let, hey, I'm going to be there so-and-so day. It helps to have hands. Like Thursday was like a last minute, said, it's not going to rain. It said it was, it's not going to rain. So I contacted some of my folks that I know live nearby, and they were able to come help me. So whether I need help or not, you're still welcome to come. But a lot of times I do need help. So especially if I have the climbing ladders, I'm supposed to have somebody or whatever. So it is good to have help, but I don't mind bringing master naturalists along
That's
just to watch and see. I never can guarantee if it's going to be real cool stuff to see or real cool stuff to do like banding. I can't guarantee that, but we'll see what we can see. But you're more likely to see the red cockaded woodpeckers this time of year because they're going back and forth. I mean, they're always on the forest year round, but during the daytime, midday, they're not usually back and forth to the nest like they are during nesting season.
We do have someone who said he could help you at Fairchild.
Yeah. Oh, Fairchild. Good. Okay. That's great.
So Vala, just when you email Donna, let her know that that's one of the places, or any of you, let Donna know if you'd like to go that far, and she'll be able to let you know when she needs some help out there.
Good. So, awesome.
Yeah. It's amazing. It is so amazing to see that.
And now, last year I couldn't do that. I missed all my volunteers last year because of COVID. Because we were outside and we're considered essential personnel, we could still go out and do forestry things. And it started right at the beginning of my woodpecker season. So I was able to go out and do that, but I had to have TFS people with me to help me. And I missed all my volunteers. So this year, being able to bring in the volunteers, I'm fully vaccinated. So it's great to have my volunteers back.
And we're getting more and more information from the state about being able to get out and do more things. So yes, we would be definitely able to go out and help you on the forest. I'm very, very excited about that. Vala says he's been poked twice.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
So that's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and let me thank you once again, Donna, for being here today and for helping.
You're welcome.
Especially with Connor's, when he had the really strange sounding.
Oh, I know it. Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
From
like a robot, metallic robot.
It made it so stretched out. So I'm so glad you were able to jump in on that. That was awesome. I really do appreciate everything you've done today, Donna. Thank you so much. So for those of you who are staying with us for a little bit longer, I wanted to have the chance to introduce a few more of our volunteers. So that way, when you're out there and you see somebody and you're like, I think I've seen you and seen your picture for classes and stuff, you'll be able to say, hello, yes, I do know who you are. So let's see who I have. Denise, you want to go ahead and actually, Denise, I think, there you are. Are you online with us today, Denise?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. So Denise, tell me, what is your favorite thing about birding so far?
Well, I have to say I'm pretty fascinated with the red cockaded woodpecker.
It makes it
a time appropriate presentation.
They are such fascinating little creatures, aren't they?
They are.
So you think you might have some up on your property north of Conroe?
Well, my property is northeast Harris County. I noticed that Roz is in the commons of Lake Houston, Rosalind Shepherd. That's where I am located. I have almost 4 acres, and part of the acreage is, of course, the home and the landscape around the home. But a good portion of it, at least 2 acres of it, is wooded. And so we have a lot of pine trees, and then we're close to a lot of forests. So I'm thinking, well, shoot, we may have that. I hear woodpeckers all the time here.
Yeah.
Of course, they're hard to see sometimes, but I'll be on the lookout, I promise.
And making sure that you know which ones are the downies and which ones are the hairies, and because they're all the smaller woodpeckers.
I'll have to, next time I get out in my yard, I'll have to have my binoculars with me.
Yes, to really tell the difference.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I keep thinking I'm seeing them. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so tiny. And then I'm like, no, that wasn't it.
How exciting.
But a girl can dream, right?
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Now,
our property out west that you mentioned earlier, that is way too far west. That's in Uvalde County. So that's going to be on the west side of San Antonio. So I don't think, if I see a red cockaded woodpecker there, it'll stir up a lot of stuff, won't it?
right.
Yes, get video evidence of that and Bigfoot.
Yes, that and Bigfoot. So when I spoke to you recently, you talked about possibly doing the coyote scat project.
Yes, I have not heard back from them yet. but I
Okay,
have emailed.
I'll shoot an email over to Diana Foss and make sure that she knows that you're waiting to find out about checking on coyote scat. Because, you know, we don't do glamorous stuff all the time like Donna does. Sometimes, you know, Donna gets to do banding of these cute little birds and little velvet sacks and climbing 30 feet up a tree, which I don't know if that's glamorous or just crazy. I'm so scared of heights that, you know, step ladders have to be limited to 2.
Yeah, right.
But you know, coyote scat is one of those things that to determine what they're eating out there, that's one of the projects we're looking forward to working on.
We do have coyotes here in the Commons, and I've also volunteered for the Adopt a Loop program. I'll be going to the Lake Houston Wilderness Park, and so I'm hoping to combine both, you know, both projects if it works out that way.
I am so glad you're going to be doing the Adopt a Loop. And for those of you who don't know full information about that, it involves IDing things that you see out there. It's not adopt a loop like you adopt a road where you go in and clean up things. Adopt a Loop is where you go out 4 times a year and you look at the flora and the fauna, and you record what you see to kind of help Texas Parks and Wildlife know what is available for people to go and look at. It's part of the Great Wildlife, what is it called? The Greater Wildlife Trail. I can't remember. It's the it's the Greater Texas Wildlife Trail. You know what I was getting it confused with? GWTW, which is Gone with the Wind. I get my acronyms confused sometimes.
I think there's like the Gulf Coast Wildlife Trail too, or something.
Yeah,
too.
yes.
It's an Adopt a Trail.
Yes, so Adopt a Trail is doing the Greater Texas Wildlife Trail, and it's certain segments of the trail that have been ID'd in our area, and part of it is in W.G. Jones Forest. So
I believe there are five trails or 5 loops. I'm new to the program, so I'm not sure about that, but I was thinking there were 5.
Right, there are several loops in our area that have been adopted, and so it's exciting to see what you're going to find out there and be able to report back. So thank you.
Excited to get started as soon as the rain stops.
Yeah.
It's crazy rain, right?
It has been crazy rain. It won't do this forever. We'll have a drought soon. But I hope that this is kind of minimizing that for us. So, Donna has dropped a PDF in the chat that gives us a description of the woodpeckers of the Eastern Texas piney woods. And it's a color brochure. So that is going to be a great way for you to determine whether or not what you're seeing in your backyard is that red cockaded woodpecker. Okay, so let's see. Let me see, do we have Sue Klein? Sue, can you unmute and tell me a little bit about your work at Jones Forest?
Am I off mute?
You are off mute. I can hear you.
I started at Jones Forest, probably almost a year ago now. And because I was trying last year when it was, I thought I was going to be in last year's class. So I've been doing it. I did it for over a year, and apparently there was bad things that happened to the big garden there. So we started absolutely from the ground up. We removed dirt, we added dirt, we built the landscaping around it. We've planted plants. Some we didn't know what they were, so I'm curious to see what is blooming this year. And it's a fabulous group of people. I cannot say enough nice things about Brenda and Terry that have kind of led it. There's just, I don't want to leave anybody out, but there's so many nice people there. They always made me feel welcome, and I would encourage anybody to join that group.
And that's the Tuesday morning group that
Yeah.
goes out and works, and it is a great group to volunteer with. Now, for those people who work, we were talking in the chat earlier about possibly having a weekend, go through the forest and pick up litter and things like that. So we do have one of our, let's see, who said that they would be willing to kind of spearhead that and collect names and emails. That's further back in the chat. So if you could make sure, oh good, it was Kendra. So Kendra, drop your email in the chat again, if you don't mind. And we'll see if we can get some volunteer groups together on the weekends, so y'all can go out and work together. It's always kind of more comfortable when you have somebody, when you're first starting to volunteer, to have somebody who can kind of show you the ropes. So that's what's really nice about being able to do the Tuesday mornings at Jones Forest and work in the pollinator garden or in the tree nursery. But then to have people who come out on the weekends will be awesome also. And there's Kendra's email address if you want to be notified of when people get together at Jones Forest and work. So yeah, a lot of people only can volunteer, and that's normal, only volunteer on the weekends and stuff. So, Sue, I am so glad that you joined us. I'm so glad you stuck with us as we, waited for this past year so we could get to actually having classes again. And I hope you're enjoying yourself as much as I am. So welcome, Sue. Now let's see who else. Kira, are you still on? I see you, Kira.
I'm here.
Hey, Kira. So tell me, what kind of naturalist are you?
Oh, I don't know. I like a little bit of everything. I'm really into gardening for pollinators, bees, butterflies. I plant for hummingbirds, and I have bird feeders out. We've got some woodpeckers in our backyard that I absolutely love to watch. Granted, they're not as cool as the ones we talked about today, but got several red-bellied and some downy woodpeckers that visit my feeders, and they are really funny to just listen to, because the red-bellied make quite interesting noises. But yeah, I mean, really a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Definitely
I have a forensics background too, so entomology is kind of cool. We grow flies and beetles in my classroom. I'm a high school teacher. So we put out rotting meat and collect eggs and grow maggots, and my kids have pet flies and talk about time of death and all of those things. Yeah.
That's amazing, Kira. That is so cool. That is really cool. So I will definitely remember that when we need to have more bugs. Do you ever do like mealworms for birds and things like that?
I don't do anything other than buy a bag of dried ones and my birdies eat them up in my backyard. I used to have a turtle and a box turtle, and we would feed him mealworms, but
yeah.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
I'm up for anything. I'm learning to love snakes.
Oh, yeah. It takes a while for some people, right? Is it taking you a little while? Yes.
We went hiking at Mercer with Cub Scouts. I'm a Cub Master, and so we went hiking at Mercer 3 weekends ago, and we had a big fat copperhead cross the trail, and we actually, instead of having everybody freak out and the whole like lynch mob, kill the snake, we actually had a conversation about it and talked about IDing it, and then just let it go on its merry way. And
awesome.
It was pretty cool.
There's a really good website about IDing, I think it's Southeast Texas snakes. And then there's one that's snakes of the woodlands that are really great for getting people kind of over the fear of snakes, and that as soon as the only good snake is a dead snake. So those are really nice. And after looking at the pictures long enough, and then they'll put one in the as a post and say, what snake do you think this is? I think that's been very helpful.
Oh yeah, on Facebook, that's what I do. The Southeast Texas Snake ID.
Yes, that's the good one. And the Woodlands, Texas snakes are Texas Snakes of the Woodlands, or just Snakes of the Woodlands. Nathan Wells runs that one, and he's such a good educator when it comes to snakes. So you might want to join that one too.
Awesome.
So Bella always has something interesting to say. Come on.
Is it okay if I go ahead and log out? It's actually my birthday, and I was getting a pedicure while we were talking about woodpeckers, but we're supposed to have a party tonight, so I got to go buy some new clothes. And I didn't want to take y'all to the dressing room with me, so
that's quite all right. You can definitely log off. We're going to talk to Bala now, so you can listen to the recording later and see what you missed out on talking to Bala about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Kara. So Bala, you're excited about all of the stuff that we do, whether it's capturing rain or looking at the red cockaded woodpecker and trying to attract them to your yard. What is your favorite thing to do as a naturalist? Uh-oh. It says you're not muted, but I can't hear you. No, I'm still, okay, good. Bala is also very good at computers, so he's got his ways.
Yeah, I was patching it through my headset.
I hear you now. There we go.
Yeah, it was trying to patch it through this one, but it wasn't connected. So there you go. Yeah, I was saying my most favorite activity is just hiking, because that's where you actually are learning a lot. And one thing I've started doing these days, even hiking locally, is I would pick a random spot and just pause and then look around me, because a lot of times you're just walking so fast and you're missing the smallest of the things. And when I do those things, I observe a lot. I mean, a lot of flowers that you don't see, itty bitty things on the ground. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of piquing my curiosity. And as a semi-retired person, I have all the time in the world now to do these things. So I'm trying to find my passion.
And there's so much to see. And my husband teases me because when we go on a walk, it'll take me 2 hours, and then it'll be time to turn around and head home. And it takes me 15 minutes to get back to the car, because there's so much to see, right? If you go hiking, people who go biking down trails, I'm like, they just missed seeing, this beautiful mushroom. They don't have time to check out the birds that we're seeing. So yeah, I totally get it. It takes us a lot longer to go out on the trail than it does to come back.
There's a funny story. We were out in Florida and we were driving so fast, and we kept looking at every marsh or a tree by the water, and we're going, why is there so much black trash bag people are putting on those things? And I was going at like 75 or something, was at the speed limit. So we said, let's just slow down, and there's no traffic. Turned out everything was a bird sitting on the tree with his wings panned like this. We just thought they were trash bags.
Oh no. Yeah, that's how the big vultures will sit like this. And I don't know if they're sunning their wings, but you'll see them sometimes around the woodlands where they'll sit out like that. That's amazing that you thought it was trash bags. I'm so glad it wasn't. That had me worried. That is pretty awesome. So we are so glad you're volunteering with us, Bala. And do you have a computer background?
Yep.
Awesome. I was just wanted to make sure.
An electrical engineer or scientist who work in occupational health, so I don't know what I am anymore.
That happens. So we're very excited that you joined us, and I look forward to seeing you out on the trail sometime. So I think that's enough for today, and we should go ahead and call it a day. And I so appreciate everyone being here, and talking in the chat about the things that y'all want to get together and do. I am so looking forward to seeing all of you. And hopefully we can open our classes up to actually meeting in person. It looks like we're getting closer to that. We just have to find a place big enough to host us all. So thank you very much for being here, Donna. Again, thank you. And I will see you at our next class, which shouldn't be until, let me pull it up real quick, my calendar. Our next class looks like it is going to be on June the 12th. Okay. I'll see you then, guys. Thank you. Thanks, Donna.